Chapter 790. The woman who walked into the shop looked to be in her 30s. She had a beautiful appearance but a head of extremely eye-catching white hair. This was also the reason why the girl was momentarily stunned. The white-haired woman's voice was soft as she asked, "I ordered a bolt of Suyan brocade here yesterday. Have they arrived yet?" "I've already sent someone to hurry them. They'll be here soon." The girl smiled apologetically and said, "Madam, why don't you take a seat in the inner room and have some tea and pastries? I'll inform you as soon as the goods arrive." The standard of this cloth shop was extremely high even in the capital where there were many shops. Because of the high price of the cloth, they usually entertained some important guests. Thus, a room was specially opened in the back for the guests to rest and entertain themselves while waiting. When the servant girl behind the white-haired woman helped her into the inner room, she said with a smile, "If second master knows that Miss has prepared a gift for him, he will definitely be very happy." The white-haired woman shook her head and said, "It's just a pair of knee pads. After the beginning of autumn, the weather has gradually become cold. Second brother has an old injury on his leg. I only hope this can lessen his pain." As the two spoke, they slowly walked into the inner room. Hiss. Zheng Zimo put down the thing in her hand and looked at the dark red spot on her fingertip. She frowned slightly and gently sucked on her finger. She was already used to this small sting, but she was not satisfied with the thing in her hand. They were both women, but Sister Ruoqing could make such exquisite little clothes. How come it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens when it came to her? A baby's little clothes had been sewn into a mess by her. Even if it wasn't for the present, she had to think about the future. Her own child had to wear a few pieces of clothes she had sewn herself. After thinking about this, her pretty face became a bit red. "Miss, are you making little clothes for the child?" A somewhat surprised voice came from behind. Zheng Zimo turned around and was startled when she saw the white-haired woman. Then her face became even redder. She hurriedly put away the things in her hand and said in a panic, "No, I'm just sewing it for fun." The white-haired woman sat down next to her with a smile and said, "There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Everything is difficult at the beginning. When I first started, I wasn't as good as you." "Really?" Zheng Zimo looked up at her in surprise. The white-haired woman nodded and looked at her asking, "Miss, did you do it for your child?" I don't have a child yet." Zheng Zimo shook her head with a blush. The white-haired woman looked at her carefully. Her eyebrows were not open yet, so she should still be a virgin. It was indeed a little too early to prepare these things. However, wasn't she the same? 20 years ago, she had the exact same thought as her. Now there were more than 10 sets of such clothes at home, but no one had ever worn them. Her gaze fell on the hands of the girl opposite her. Looking at the clothes that were so badly made, she seemed to be reminded of something. After staring blankly for a moment, she shook her head and pointed at a certain spot on the clothes. She smiled and said, "Look, this place shouldn't be sewn like this." Hearing her mention clothes, Zheng Zimo hurriedly looked up. The white-haired woman smiled and said, "And here you can't use this kind of needlework here. I will teach you a needlework technique." It was taught by the best nanny in the mansion. Zheng Zimo had a very high level of painting, and she had designed so many clothing styles. Naturally, her imagination was very strong. The white-haired woman only needed to give her a little poke, and she could immediately figure out the mystery. She took apart the place that had been sewn and did it according to what the white-haired woman had taught her. It was indeed much better than before. "Thank you so much." At this moment, she finally found the right direction and felt a sense of accomplishment. She held the white-haired woman's hand and said excitedly. The white-haired woman smiled and asked, "Miss and your lover should be getting married soon, right?" Zheng Zimo was startled. She lowered her head and said with a blush, I don't know when." The white-haired woman patted her hand and said, "Needlework is not difficult. As long as you put your heart into it, you can quickly learn it. It's urgent." This matter couldn't be explained. Zheng Zimo just blushed and lowered her head in silence. At this time, the girl from before walked in and said, "Madam, the Suyan brocade you wanted has arrived." The white-haired woman stood up and nodded. She thought for a moment and asked, "Do you have soft smoke and cicada gauze here?" Soft smoke and cicada gauze, were the materials that had been the talk of the capital recently. Everyone talked about them as if they were gods. There were even a few stories about these two materials that no one knew if were true or false. Although they hadn't been sold yet, the price had already reached an outrageous level. The girl shook her head and said, "These two materials haven't been officially sold yet. You won't be able to buy them in any cloth store in the capital." The white-haired woman nodded and said, "Then forget it. Young miss, I heard that the soft smoke net is extremely thin. If you use it as a mosquito net, it will look like smoke from a distance. Is it true?" As she walked out of the shop, a young maid carrying a piece of cloth behind her muttered, "I only heard about it from the second madam. I wanted to buy it for her, but since it hasn't been sold yet, we'll talk about it later." The white-haired woman shook her head and said, "Let's go back." Wait a moment. Footsteps came from behind her. The white-haired woman turned around and saw the girl from before quickly walking out. Zheng Zimo looked at her and said with a smile, "If you want the soft smoke and cicada gauze, I just happen to have some extra. If you don't mind." The white-haired woman paused for a moment before nodding slightly. "Okay. Miss, this soft smoke is so thin. It would look great if it was made into a mosquito net. That girl is so generous, giving us 4 bolts at once. I heard there are only 4 colors, now we have all of them. This cicada gauze is also not bad, and it looks good. These two materials can't be bought in the entire capital. I wonder where Miss Singh got them." On the street, 2 young servant girls carried several bolts of cloth in their arms and whispered to each other as they walked. Behind them, a man with a square face turned his head and said in a low voice, "Go and find out where that girl from earlier came from." The white-haired woman looked back at them and said, "No need. If we meet anyone on the street, we will also investigate their background. How many people does second brother need to arrange around me?" The man had a troubled expression and said, "Third miss, but the second master. If second brother asks, I will give him an explanation." The white-haired woman looked at him and said, "However, second brother is usually busy with work. Don't bother him with these small things." "Yes." The man could only nod helplessly. The white-haired woman turned around and revealed a slight smile. Looking at the girl, she felt like she was looking at herself from many years ago. This was why she taught her those things in the cloth shop. Later, the girl sent someone back to fetch the cloth, and the two of them sat in the shop for a while and chatted. Of course, most of the time, it was the girl who asked her about needlework. She also answered them one by one, including the girl's request to set up a time to continue asking her for advice. She also agreed without hesitation. She could understand the girl's thoughts. She made clothes for her own child. Even if her finger was pricked by needles and was riddled with scars, no matter how much she suffered, her heart would still be sweet. Just like her from 20 years ago. Chapter 791. Ever since he lost to Her Royal Highness the last time, Li had never received a smile from Mississippi Lu. Of course, the behavior of taking the initiative to pick up food for him during meals had never appeared again. For this matter, Li felt very wronged. That day, she clearly did not perform well, which was why she lost to Princess Royal by half a move. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. These days, Princess Royal's good friend came to visit, but she did not take the opportunity to find Princess Royal to regain her face. Instead, she vented her anger on him. To think that he thought she was reasonable last time. He had really misjudged her. Moreover, she only lost by half a move, but Princess Royal lost her entire life. It was clear at a glance which was more important, and which was more important. Li sighed. They were all family. She was unreasonable, but he could not argue with her. She clearly did not do anything wrong, but she still had to think about how to ease the situation. Fong walked in with a box in his hand and asked, "Young master, this broken thing is not worth much money. Why do you still want to make it?" The broken thing he was talking about was the glass that had gone from a value of 10,000 gold to worthless in a short period of time. It should be called glass now. Ever since Lioli lowered the price, the secret glass workshop had not been shut down. To old Fong, it was a complete waste of manpower and resources. He opened the box and took out something from inside. He weighed it in his hand and waved it in front of old Fang's eyes. He shook his head and said, "What's the use of this lousy thing other than being able to see people more clearly?" Sometimes, old Fang was like a wise man, but sometimes he just couldn't wrap his head around it. This small mirror was something that he had spent a lot of effort to create with great difficulty. In terms of effect, of course, it could not be compared to the electroplated mirrors of the future, but it was only a little darker, and the clarity was not bad. At least, it was hundreds of times better than the bronze mirrors of this world. Glass could not only be sold as a luxury. Now that the mirror had been made, the next step, Li planned to get someone to grind it and see if they could make a set of binoculars. This thing was very useful in many places. For example, it could be used to observe the situation of the enemy in the army, to enjoy the scenery when traveling, or to steal. Of course, none of this was important. The most important thing right now was how to use this mirror to mend the cracks in his relationship with Mississippi Lu, to bury the hatchet, to reconcile, to rekindle old dreams. A mirror was indispensable in a woman's room, especially for a woman who loved beauty. If a glass mirror was placed in this era, it would definitely be a treasure pursued by countless women. Li glanced at Fang and was too lazy to explain to him. Mississippi Lu had just finished practicing her sword, and was now wiping her precious autumn water. Li walked over and stood in front of her. Mississippi Lu continued to wipe her sword without lifting her head. Li handed over the already embedded mirror and said, "Don't wipe it yet. I'll give you something." One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Mississippi Lu finally spoke, but she still did not raise her head. Li moved the mirror closer again to make it easier for her to see herself in the mirror. Second young mistress Lu finally stopped moving. She stared at the woman in the mirror, whose features were extremely clear. She was completely stunned. She was used to seeing a blurry bronze mirror. It was impossible for her not to be shocked when she suddenly saw her other self in the clear glass mirror. "What's wrong? Have you never seen such a beautiful woman before?" One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Li looked at her proudly. "This is the one and only Lioli glass mirror in the world. Just take it as me being solicitous. If you don't want it, I'll give it to someone else." In a flash, the mirror in his hand disappeared. He did not even have time to react. This made Li understand more about the gap between him and Mississippi Lu. Thanks. She really liked the mirror in her hand. The bronze mirror in the room could be thrown away in a moment. Mississippi Lu raised her head and glanced at it. With this sentence, it meant that she had been bought over by him. This mirror was worth it. Fang looked at this scene from afar with an extremely surprised expression on his face. He had seen the second miss arguing with the son-in-law because of jealousy these days. Just because of that broken thing, the second miss compromised first? Although there were many things he did not understand, he was not stupid. If the second miss liked it so much, it meant that it was not that broken. It was very likely to be a valuable treasure. He quickly walked over and looked at Li. He smiled and said, "Son-in-law, the workshop has made more than 10 pieces of this thing." He counted with his fingers and said, "You can give away 10 pieces at most. Can you leave 2 for me?" Li looked at him in a daze. He then looked back at Mississippi Lu and found that Mississippi Lu was also looking at him at the same time. Mississippi Lu crossed her arms, her eyes shining. "One of a kind?" Li Yi's face darkened. He grabbed Fang's arm and walked out. Go, go, go. Why are you keeping it? You need to change this habit of yours. If Mrs. Fang finds out, I'll see how you deal with it." He couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. If he gave Miss Lu a mirror, it meant that he had to give many more. The one in Rui's room was naturally the brightest and largest. Xiao Huan, Shanning, and Yongning's room were all in cartoon shapes. Princess Royal got 1, Willow Lane got 2, Fang got 2, and his family got at least 2 more. The last one was taken by Li Xian. He needed more time to make it again. What do you think is the principle of this glass mirror? Why can it reflect people's figures so clearly? Why is the handwriting in the mirror reversed? Li was fishing in the lake of the School of Mathematics. Since he found that the fish here were fat and easy to catch, he did not plan to buy from the market. It was best to catch fish by himself. However, since Li Xian came over and started talking to himself, he had not caught a single fish. He had caught 2 just now. It was enough for today. Li put away his rod and looked at the Princess Royal in the pavilion behind him. He asked, "Last time the School of Mathematics lacked books and paper. Have you solved the problem?" Although it was not class time, the 3 deans were here. Even the students of the School of Mathematics avoided them. Before the eldest princess could say anything, Li Xian said, "Of course not. How else can we solve this? Normal books are easy to deal with. Although most of the engravings are controlled by the powerful families, the ones we can find should be enough. However, the books you specified don't have engravings. How to print them is a big problem. If we were to engrave them one by one, it would cost a lot. I'm afraid that most of the money we have would have to be invested in this area," he said angrily. "And paper. Once the schools of mathematics start to operate, there will be a huge demand for paper. Although the higher the demand, the lower the price. However, almost 90% of the paper shops are in the hands of the rich families." In order to discuss this, Emingzu visited the Yu family 3 times. She didn't even get to see the head of the Yu family. "You still have the cheek to say that?" Li Yi threw down the fishing rod and looked at him. He asked, "If there is no engraving, why don't you think of a way? Paper is expensive, and the rich families don't cooperate. Why don't you reduce the cost and make your own? If you have to rely on Emingzu to think of a way, what use is the Academy of Sciences? What use are you?" Chapter 792. Solve the problem of engraving? Li Xian looked as if he had heard a fairy tale, and stared straight at Li Yi. "It's easy for you to say. Do you think it's like the existing collections of history? There are countless engravings, and the teaching materials you mentioned have not been compiled yet. Where can I find so many craftsmen to engrave them one by one? Even if I can really engrave them, I don't know how long it will take. As for improving the paper making and lowering the cost, if it could be lowered, it would have been done long ago. There are many kinds of paper on the market, but only a few are suitable for writing. The aristocratic families like the Yu family, which have been around for hundreds of years, all have their own unique paper-making formula, which is the most widely circulated in the market. If they don't cooperate, this matter can't be improved." Li Xian's spittle flew as he spoke, and his tone was rather indignant. "No one has solved these 2 problems for thousands of years. How can we solve them so easily?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Oh, do you want to bet?" Li Xian looked at him and asked, "What do you want to bet on?" "Let's bet on whether I can make cheap and high-quality paper, and whether I can think of a way to print books in large quantities in a short period of time. Haha, these 2 things are related to all the scholars in the world. Don't try to trick me. If you have such a method, you would have taken it out when you were building the academy. Why would you wait until now?" Li Xian sneered and asked, "Tell me, what are the stakes?" "I haven't thought of the stakes yet. We'll talk about it later, but I'm sure it won't be too much." "Why, are you afraid?" "Afraid?" Li Xian sneered. "Why don't you go out and ask around? I'm the crown prince. What have I been afraid of? Then do you want to bet or not?" No. Although he was not afraid, if he still insisted on betting with him knowing that he would lose, then it wasn't a question of whether he was afraid or not, but whether he was stupid or not. Based on past experience, whenever he made a bet with her, he must be very confident about something. Today, his tone was so certain that it couldn't be any more successful. Only a fool would make such a bet. Li Xian had a fierce expression on his face as he said, "You have to teach the Yu family a lesson and help Emingzu vent her anger." Li Yi picked up the 2 fish and walked back. As he walked, he muttered to himself, "How should I eat the fish today? Thank you so much for the past 2 days." In the small pavilion of the cloth shop, Zheng Zimo stood up and bowed to the white-haired woman. The white-haired woman smiled and said, "It's okay. I have nothing to do anyway. I haven't touched these things for many years, so I'm a bit rusty. I probably won't have the chance to do it in the future. I'm afraid I'll forget about it if time passes." Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, "How can there be no chance to do it? I don't know if your child is married yet. In the future, your child will also have children. They will be very happy wearing the clothes you made." "My child?" The white-haired woman's eyes were a bit dazed. Then she smiled and said, "That's true. While I can still do it, I should make more. After a few years, I won't be able to do it." She turned to look at the girl with a smile and said, "I like the fabrics in this shop very much. If there are any new styles in the future, please keep an eye out for me." Zheng Zimo nodded with a smile. Recently, all the famous fabrics in the capital are available here. As long as you have heard of them, just send someone to get them. Due to some marketing reasons, many of the best fabrics needed to be preheated in advance. After a period of discussion in the capital, they would be pushed out. Before this, it was almost impossible for others to get the fabrics. However, these cloth shops and the clothing shops in the capital were all under her control. Naturally, there was no problem of not getting the goods. Chen Miaoyu suddenly looked at Zheng Zimo and asked, "Miss Zheng is about to get married, right?" Zheng Zimo heard this and blushed a little. She whispered, "No, not at all." Chen Miaoyu looked at her with a smile on her face. She held her hand and said, "Although we are women, since we have met someone we like, we still have to fight for him. How can a moment of reserve compare to a lifetime of happiness?" Hearing this, her face became even redder. She had seen, kissed, hugged, and even said such shameful words. How could she still have any reserve? In short, don't regret what you do now. Chen Miaoyu patted her hand and said, "I should go too. I will see you off." Although they hadn't met many times, the two of them were very congenial. When they walked out of the inner room hand in hand, they heard a slightly messy sound coming from the shop. Inside the shop, a young girl said apologetically, "My apologies, sir, the soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn haven't arrived yet. Please wait for a few days. As soon as they arrive, we will immediately send someone to inform you." Inside the shop, the young man hugged an enchanting woman and whispered with his head lowered, "You see, they don't have the goods here. There's nothing we can do." The enchanting woman said coquettishly, "It's not that they don't have the goods. These two kinds of fabrics are only produced in their shop. Young master you doesn't know, but she can tell you that they don't have them here. Those slutty foxes in the Jade Courtyard all use them." The young man showed a hesitant expression. He didn't know the details of this cloth shop, but he knew that it was impossible to do business in the capital without some kind of background. The Yu family was also a big aristocratic family in the Jing kingdom. Although it was not as big as the Cui family and the Wang family, it was not far behind. Because of the relationship between the king of Shu, the Yu family and the Cui family were especially close. Unlike the Cui family, which mainly dealt in jewelry, the Yu family had been running a paper mill for decades. The Yu family's paper name was known throughout the Jing kingdom. In the eyes of most people, they were a top scholarly family. However, this was not the capital he was proud of. At least for now. The Yu family did not have the capital to let him run amok at the bottom of a well. Just as young Master Yu was hesitating, the enchanting woman beside him leaned over and whispered something in his ear. "I heard that the soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn are extremely thin, and the color is also beautiful. If I wear them, I will definitely look good with half of them covered. When the time comes, I will wear them for you to see." Although young Master Yu didn't know what soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn were, he understood the woman's words. Suddenly, a blurry image appeared in his mind. Although the Yu family was not strong enough to run amok in the capital, that was in the past. Now even the eldest princess, who presided over the court, had a favor to ask of the Yu family, but she did not get to see her father. Recently, the Cui family was extremely satisfied with the Yu family. In the future, when the king of Shu ascended to the throne, the Yu family might be able to climb even higher. Even if there was someone behind the shop, they would not dare to provoke the Yu family now. Once again thinking of the eye-catching image that appeared in his mind, young Master Yu reached into his robe and adjusted his posture. Then, he looked at the woman and said angrily, "How dare you lie to me? You didn't receive the goods? Then tell me, where did the cloth on the outside come from?" Chapter 793. In the shop, the young girl had an awkward expression. Young master, we really..." "You shut up." Young Master Yu impatiently waved his hand and interrupted her. "Where is your shop manager? Let him personally tell me if you have any goods or not." As soon as he finished speaking, several men who looked like guards immediately walked up and stood behind him. They were full of vigor. A slightly older woman turned around to look at the door of the inner room. Seeing the woman at the door nod slightly, she immediately walked up and said, "Young master, I'm really sorry. We don't have soft smoke silk and cicada wing yarn at the moment. I don't know where young master's residence is. Once we have the goods tomorrow, we will immediately send someone to deliver them to your residence." Seeing the attitude of the shop manager immediately soften, young Master Yu's heart calmed down a bit. It seemed that the power behind this shop wasn't that great. However, since the other party had expressed goodwill, he didn't need to be overbearing and make an enemy for no reason. "Ning Yuan Ho's residence," he lightly said. He lowered his head to look at the enchanting woman and whispered, "You see, they said that they will deliver it tomorrow. Why don't we wait a bit longer?" "I will listen to young master." The woman nodded. She then glanced around the shop and her eyes suddenly lit up. She pointed at a young maidservant in front of her who was holding a roll of cloth and said, "That Kunyu courtyard has a relationship with them, so they can always get the latest styles earlier. I won't ask for anything else, but young master, I also want a roll of cloth like that." Young Master Yu tilted his head and glanced at this woman. He had spent a lot of effort to win over this woman. She was a famous prostitute in the capital. It was said that she hadn't been combed. Although he only wanted to play with her, he still wanted to spend a night with her, so that he wouldn't waste the effort of the past few days. He only wanted to quickly get tonight. Before that, he would naturally do his best to satisfy the other party's request. It was only a roll of cloth. He pointed at the maidservant and said to the cloth store manager, "Did you hear that? Bring 2 rolls of cloth like the one in her hands for this young master." The steward looked back with a troubled expression and said, "Young master, I'm really sorry. This type of woven cloud brocade will only be available for sale in 3 months. The soft smoke gauze and cicada wing muslin were going on sale today, so it was fine to give it to him 2 days in advance. However, this woven cloud brocade was a new material that wasn't going to be put on the market in the near future. She didn't have the right to decide. This time, there was no need for the enchanting woman to pout coquettishly. Young Master Yu's expression had already darkened. Just now, he had clearly told the other party that his home was Ning Yuan Ho Mansion. But now, the other party was pointing at the cloth in the servant girl's hand, and said that it would only be sold in 3 months. Was he teasing him? The weight of the 3 words, Marquis Ning Yuan, was not so light. Moreover, the Yu residence of today was no longer the Yu residence of yesterday. It was about to soar to new heights. As the 3rd young master of the Yu family, how could he be humiliated again and again? He took 2 steps forward and suddenly smiled. "What did you say? Say it again." At this time, another woman walked out from behind and said faintly, "I'm very sorry, this shop's cloth is still in the testing stage. This bolt is only a sample. If this young master is really interested, please come back in 3 months." When he saw the woman in front of him, a strange expression appeared on young Master Yu's face. He then pointed at the young servant girl holding the cloth and said, "Oh, a sample. Since it's a sample, then give this young master 8 or 10 bolts. Otherwise, this young master would like to ask, why can your cloth be given to the prostitutes in the brothel, but not this young master?" Thinking of the woman's words, young Master Yu's gaze swept across the room. When he saw the white-haired woman, he curled his lips and said, "The brothels these days really have all kinds of tricks. There are even white-haired girls. I don't know how those people could bear to do it." He didn't conceal his voice when he said this. Zheng Zima was startled when she heard this. Then anger appeared in her beautiful eyes. However, before she could speak, a clear voice reached her ears. "Shut up." Inside the shop, a middle-aged man's expression had been calm until young Master Yu said this. His face instantly turned ashen. He took 2 steps forward and slapped him hard in the face. Young Master Yu seemed to be stunned by this sudden slap. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. After stabilizing himself for a long time, he felt the burning pain on his face. Only then did he understand what had just happened. "What are you still standing there for?" He kicked the guard next to him and said angrily, "Break his hand for me." Third young miss, go in and rest for a while. Leave this to us. The middle-aged man turned around and said softly. He cracked the joints of his hands, and when he turned back, his expression became fierce. He looked at the dozen or so figures coming in from outside and ordered, "Be careful not to break anything in the shop." At this time, seeing the crowd surrounding them, young Master Yu, who realized what had happened, began to pale. "You, what do you want? My father is Ning Yuan Ho, and I am a member of the Yu family. You, if you dare to make a move." Zheng Zimo was pulled by the white-haired woman into the inner room in a daze. Only a moment later, the middle-aged man came in and said respectfully, "It's all taken care of. Third young miss, let's go." Chen Miaoyu turned her head and smiled at Zheng Zimo. "I'll go first." Zheng Zimo nodded absent-mindedly. Only now did she understand that the identity of this Madame Chen, who was skilled in needlework, did not seem to be as simple as she had imagined. At this moment, young Master Yu was no longer in the shop. He and his guards had been grabbed by the arms and thrown out of the shop. Only the enchanting woman was left. Her face was pale, and when she came to her senses, she screamed and ran out in a panic. In a brothel somewhere in the capital, several women looked at the enchanting woman who walked in and said with a smile, "Oh, why are you back so early today? Why didn't that young Master Yu pester you a little longer? Sigh, why am I not as lucky as my sister? The Yu family is truly noble. If I can be taken back by young Master Yu as a concubine, I won't have to worry about wealth for the rest of my life." The enchanting woman laughed and teased them for a while. Then, she went upstairs by herself. She walked into her room and closed the door. "How is it?" The enchanting woman turned around with a solemn expression. Looking at the other side of the curtain, she said, "It's very different from the plan. There wasn't much conflict with the other party." She quietly recounted what happened today. After a long time, a voice came from the other side. "It's fine, these are enough. The one who suffered today was young Master Yu. As long as the Yu family doesn't pursue the matter, isn't Milord's plan." The Yu family. The voice of the man behind the curtain was still very calm. Whether to pursue the matter or not is not up to the Yu family. Chen Chong only has one sister. For her, he would turn against his own family. That person will not let the Yu family off easily. However, one Yu family is not enough. "Milord, leave the capital before tomorrow and never come back." Chapter 794. The capital magistrate, Lu Dayo, had been very busy recently. Every day he worked day and night. He was often busy until late at night. He could fall asleep with his head on the pillow, causing his wife and concubines to complain a lot about him. He could only pretend that he did not see their resentful gazes. Several academies in the capital were still in the midst of preparations. After the corresponding preparations were completed, they would have to face the problem of recruiting students. Her Highness had handed this matter over to him, so he naturally had to do his best. Now that His Majesty had retired and Princess Royal was temporarily in charge of the court, Lu Dayo had more opportunities than most of the officials in the court. After all, as the former magistrate of Anxi County, and what he had done after coming to the capital city, he had long been labeled as Princess Royal. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get such a great credit for the preparation of the academy. Fortunately, since Princess Royal took over the government, the situation in the court had changed. Many people didn't know the situation for a while, so the capital city was much more peaceful. There were no more chores to bother him, so he could concentrate on the preparation of the academy. "Your Excellency." Arrestor Zhao knocked on the door and walked in. He stood in the hall and cupped his hands respectfully to Wei Xiaobao. "What's the matter?" County Magistrate Lu glanced at him and asked, "Is there another difficult case?" "It's not difficult." Detective Zhao shook his head and said, "Today I saw people from Marquis Chen's mansion fighting with people from Marquis Ning Yuan's mansion on the street." Marquis Chen's mansion and Marquis Ning Yuan's mansion? County Magistrate Lu put down his pen and frowned. These two families have always been close, and they are both King of Shu's people. What kind of fight did they have? Did they report it to the Yamen? Not really. Detective Zhao shook his head and said, People from Marquis Ningyuan's mansion seemed to have suffered a loss and then went their separate ways. County Magistrate Lu glared at him and said, "Why did you come to me if you didn't report it to the Yamen? Don't you think I have enough things to do here?" "I have spoken out of turn." Detective Zhao hurriedly bowed and turned to leave the hall. He whispered, "Young master, you could have provoked anyone, but he provoked third Miss Chen." "Who?" Hearing that name, County Magistrate Lu trembled and asked, "Who are you talking about?" After a while, after listening to Detective Zhao's story, County Magistrate Lu breathed a sigh of relief and murmured, "It's good that you didn't intervene in it. Just pretend that you didn't see it. Don't get involved in it." He knew better than anyone else how Royal Prince Duanyang's 2 ribs were broken. Furthermore, although he hadn't been in the capital for long, he had long heard of the rumors about the minister in charge. That was a lunatic who wouldn't even recognize his own family as long as his reverse scale was touched. The Yu family were in big trouble. Hai Dukchen Public House. Yu family. Qin Chong took a sip of tea and said, "The eldest princess has visited 3 times, but Yu Dingfeng refused to see her, claiming to be sick. He has also announced that he won't sell a single piece of paper to the academy. The official workshops belong to the imperial court and can't all serve the academy. If this problem can't be solved, I'm afraid that the eldest princess's academy can only be built in the sky." Opposite him, Chen Qing nodded. The imperial consort is very satisfied with the Yu family this time. In addition, the Yu family has always been His Highness the King of Shu's wallet. This time, the Cui family has suffered heavy losses, so the Yu family's importance is even more prominent. In the future, the Yu family will have a high status in the imperial court. Perhaps at that time, even our Chen family will have to rely on them. Although they didn't want others to climb over their heads, the Yu family's importance now surpassed that of the Chen family. If they really succeeded in the future, the Yu family's contributions would not go unnoticed. The 2 brothers continued to comment on the current imperial court situation, when a servant came in to report. Chen Qing looked down and asked lightly, "What's the matter?" The servant immediately said, "Just now outside, a few guards of the Chen family had a conflict with 3rd Young Master Yu of Ningyuan Marquis' residence." 3rd Young Master Yu of Ningyuan Marquis' residence? Hearing this, Chen Qing frowned and asked, "Was it Li Yan or Li Xing? What happened? Was anyone injured?" "It's not the 2 young masters. No one in our residence was injured, but 3rd Young Master Yu suffered a small loss. It's good that no one was injured." Chen Chong waved his hand and said, "Young people are hot-blooded and can be forgiven. This is nothing. Send someone to prepare a generous gift and send it to the Yu residence. Then this matter will be considered settled." If it was anyone else, there would naturally be no need for generous gifts. However, the Yu family was different. The Yu family had a bright future ahead of them, so the Chen family still had to show some sincerity. He looked at the servant and asked, "If it wasn't Li Yan or Li Xing, could it be Li Shen? We had just confined him a few days ago and just released him today. And he's already causing trouble again?" The servant knelt on the ground and said in a low voice, "It wasn't young Master Li Shen either. It was 3rd Young Master Yu's guard. That 3rd Young Master Yu didn't know 3rd Young Master Yu's identity and said some vulgar words." "Miaoyu?" Chen Chong suddenly stood up from his chair and asked, "What did the one surnamed Yu say? Speak." He said that 3rd Young Master is a prostitute." Crack. The teacup shattered and the tea splashed everywhere. "Bastard, he's Yu Dingfeng's good son." An extremely gloomy voice sounded in the hall. Not long after, a wave of disorderly footsteps resounded within the Chen estate. The Chen clan's 2nd master's face was livid, and a few dozen guards followed behind him as they hurriedly left the Chen estate. They headed west in a threatening manner, and all the people on the way moved aside in terror as they gazed towards a certain direction with lingering fear in their hearts, wondering exactly what had happened. Ningyuan Marquis' residence. Tears welled up in the eyes of the gorgeously dressed woman. She held 3rd Young Master Yu's hand and sobbed. Who did this to him? My poor Yu. Chen family? How did you get into a conflict with the Chen family? How many times have I told you? The situation in the capital is unclear, so try not to cause trouble for me. Do you all have ears? A middle-aged man stood next to her and glanced at the bruised and swollen face of third young Master Yu with a pained expression. He turned his head and asked the guards with a cold expression. One of the guards replied fearfully, "Third young master didn't do anything and they attacked first. This time it really wasn't young master's fault." As he spoke, he recounted the entire incident. Of course, he omitted the part where the young man had insulted the woman from the Chen family, offending the Chen family just for a prostitute. Ning Yuan Ho, Yu Dingfeng's face darkened as he said, "When will you grow a little more careful? The Chen family has gone too far. You didn't do anything and they beat him to this state." The woman's eyes welled up with tears as she gritted her teeth and said, "Master, you must get justice for Yu." The middle-aged man looked at third young Master Yu and asked with a frown, "You already told them where you came from. Why would the Chen family attack you for no reason?" Third young Master Yu's face was full of resentment as he said, "How would I know? The Chen family are all crazy. That second young master of the Chen family is crazy. And so is that white-haired woman. I only said one thing to her." "What did you say?" Ning Yuan Ho's expression changed and his heart skipped a beat. "What white-haired woman?" Third young Master Yu acted as if he didn't see the panic on his father's face and said, "I don't know. I only heard that person say something about third young Miss Chen, third young Miss Chen. Oh no." Ning Yuan Ho's face was pale. He had just muttered a few words when someone ran in from outside in a panic. A servant of the Yu family panted heavily as he ran over and said with a terrified expression, Master, something bad has happened." The Chen family is here." Ning Yuan Ho's expression changed drastically, and he waved his hand without hesitation. Quickly hide the young master." The second young master of the Chen family had brought a group of people with him and aggressively attacked Ning Yuan Ho's estate. Even in the capital, which never lacked for entertainment, it was still a big event. After hearing the news, the entire capital was in an uproar in an extremely short period of time. Countless people were paying attention to the development of this matter. Some people were watching from the estate while others hurriedly left and rushed in the direction of Ning Yuan Ho's estate. Inside the yamen, County Magistrate Liu reminded Constable Chen again, "Remember, you didn't see anything just now and you don't know anything." At the Ministry of Revenue Yamen, Assistant Minister Zeng hurriedly took his leave and immediately left in a sedan chair. At the Cui family estate, a carriage drove out from the side door and quickly headed in a certain direction. Qin Estate. Qin Yan, who had just heard the news, quickly walked out of the estate. Just as he was about to step onto the carriage, a voice came from behind him. "Big brother, where are you going?" Qin Yan already had one foot on the carriage. He turned his head to look and frowned. "Where did you go again? You didn't even eat lunch at home." Lord Father just asked. Qin Fifth Master smiled and said, "There was a new show at the brothel today. I was so engrossed in it that I forgot the time. If you like to listen to shows, just by a few actors at home, it's best not to go to that kind of place." Qin Yan said this, and then boarded the carriage. He let down the curtain and urged, "Quick to Ning Yuan Ho's estate." Qin Fifth Master shook his head. When he stepped into the Qin estate with his hands behind his back, he muttered in a low voice, "How can the shows at home be better than those outside?" Chapter 795. The second master of the Chen family, Chen Chong, had led dozens of guards from the house of high dukes. They passed through the streets and alleys, aggressively attacking Ning Yuan Ho's residence. This incident had caused quite a stir in the capital for the past 2 days. The Ho's residence had been attacked. On a large scale, this was a crime punishable by death. But on a smaller scale, it could be so small that the authorities did not even need to show up. The attackers were from the House of High Dukes, led by Chen Chong. When the incident happened, the capital was in an uproar. However, this incident did not cause any serious consequences. Although the main gate of Ning Yuan Ho's residence had been torn down, the Yu family did not say anything. The authorities would not come looking for trouble. The commotion yesterday was not small. Not only the Chen and Yu families, but the Zeng, Cui, and Qin families, as well as many officials from the King of Shu's faction, all went to Yu's residence. Although it was not known how the incident was resolved, it was not a big deal. Li Yi knew about this yesterday, but he was only a little surprised. Internal strife was the custom of the King of Shu's faction, so he was not surprised. At this moment, he was listening to Xiao Chui complain that someone had caused trouble at the cloth shop yesterday. Although they were chased out, they said some nasty things that even she could not bear to listen to. That madam was very kind and taught the young miss many things. Now the clothes that the young miss sewed were not as ugly as they used to be. Who was causing trouble yesterday? Li looked at her and asked. Xiao Chui thought for a moment and said, "It was something like young master you. I think it was Ning Yuan Ho or something. I can't remember." Li was startled. Ning Yuan Ho. Why did these three words sound so familiar? It seemed that the Yu family head that the eldest princess could not meet was Ning Yuan Ho. This morning, the internal strife incident was still spreading in the capital, and Ning Yuan Ho was also the male lead. The Yu family, what a coincidence. If the Yu family bullied others like this, the heavens would naturally accept it. He shook his head and then asked Xiaocui, "Earlier, you said that the madam who has been very close to your young miss recently, what's going on?" "This." Xiao Chui blinked and said, "I met her at the cloth shop last time. That madam is very good at needlework. She taught young miss how to make children's clothes." "Do you know which family's madam is it?" Although the two women were surrounded by people to protect them, Li did not want to give them the feeling that they were being monitored all the time. In addition to ensuring their safety, he would not interfere with other things. Even so, the sudden appearance of a madam by her side still had to be investigated. "I don't know. We only know that her surname is Chun." "That madam has never mentioned it, so we can't ask her directly. However, she usually brings a lot of guards with her when she goes out." Xiao Chui blinked her eyes twice, then she patted her head and said, "That's right, that madam's age isn't that old, but her hair is all white. That servant girl called her third lady. Third miss surnamed Chen, and her hair is all white?" Li Yi was stunned. It can't be such a coincidence, right? On the street, Zheng Zimo and the white-haired woman walked side by side. The latter turned her head to look at her and asked, "The Yu family didn't make things difficult for you afterward, did they?" Zheng Zimo shook her head. "No, this is the capital. They wouldn't dare to do anything. The Yu family is powerful after all. It's better to be careful," she reminded. "If the Yu family makes things difficult for you in the future, come find me at Duke Chen's residence." Although the two had seen each other several times these days, due to their own reasons, they usually referred to each other as Madam Chen and Miss Zheng. They had never voluntarily revealed their identities. Zheng Zimo had already guessed that her identity was not ordinary from yesterday's incident. But she still did not expect it to be to this extent. Even the current Zheng family could not compare to a behemoth like the Chen family. Soon, she threw these thoughts to the back of her mind and nodded politely. She glanced around and suddenly realized that they were almost at Willow Lane. She pointed forward and said, "My house is just ahead. Madam, do you want to come in and sit for a bit?" Hearing this, the white-haired woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded lightly. "Miss, are you not from the capital?" As the two walked forward, the white-haired woman suddenly asked. This area belonged to the downtown area. There were no big mansions, and officials and rich families would not choose to build their houses here. This Miss Zheng had an extraordinary temperament, and she had such a shop in the capital. She had thought that she was also the daughter of such a family, but now it seemed that this was not the case. "I stayed in the capital for a few years when I was a child. Later, I went to another place and came back last year." Zheng Zimo briefly mentioned this matter. She did not want to mention some memories about the capital, including her own name. After all, more than 10 years ago, the Zheng family was also prominent. However, in that Zheng family, all the men of the direct line died, and the women became the musical house. Everything here, for her, was an extremely horrible memory. The white-haired woman did not ask further. The two walked to the entrance of an alley. Zheng Zimo smiled and pointed inside, saying, "It's in there." Above the entrance of the alley, there was a stone plaque, on which the words Willow Alley were written. The white-haired woman just glanced at it, and walked in side by side with Zheng Zimo. After a few steps, she suddenly stopped and murmured, "Willow Alley?" As if thinking of something, she looked back at Zhang Zimo with an expression of disbelief and expectation. "Miss Zhang. Is it Miss Zhang Zimo from Willow Alley?" Hearing her name from the mouth of a person she had never revealed made her completely ignore the fact that the Willow Alley in front of her was not the eldest daughter of the Zhang family. Her body trembled, and her face turned pale. However, after Mrs. Chun said this, the expression on her face was different from any of what she had imagined. Surprise, and even a little bit of love? Seeing her reaction, Chun Miaoyu knew that her guess was right. Holding her hand, a smile appeared on her face, and she said, "It turns out to be you. I should have asked earlier. Zhang Zimo was confused by her reaction and asked in confusion, "Mrs. Chun, you know me?" Chun Miaoyu held her hand and said with a smile, "Let's go in and talk." Zhang Zimo was pulled by her and walked into the alley in a daze. "Okay, I'll go first. When your young miss or Miss Ruoqing comes back, just let them know." In the small courtyard, Li Yi stood up and patted Xiao Chui's head, saying, "Next time I come, I'll bring 2 glass mirrors for you and Xiaozhu." Really? Xiao Chui's eyes were shining. She had envied the mirror in her young miss room that could clearly reflect a person's figure for a long time. "Yes, you must keep your promise." Li Yi walked to the door of the courtyard, then turned back and waved. "Let's go." He raised his hand to open the door, but the door was pushed open from the outside. "I didn't expect you to know before." Zhang Zimo turned her head and walked in while talking to Mrs. Chun. When she stepped over the threshold, her chest was suddenly pressed by something. She looked back, saw Li Yi standing at the door, and lowered her head again. Looking at Miss Zhang and Miss Chun standing at the door, Li Yi's mouth slightly opened. He could swear on his conscience that just now, he really just wanted to open the door. "You're back, what a coincidence." His expression didn't change. He helped her tidy up her clothes and said with a smile, Chapter 796. How old are you? Your clothes are wrinkled and you don't even know how to tidy them up. If it wasn't for Xiao Chui, you wouldn't even be able to take care of yourself. Li Yi helped her tidy up her clothes and looked at her with a frown. Then he turned to the white-haired woman and smiled. "You're here too. Come on in." Zhang Zimo looked at him, and then at Mrs. Chun next to her. Confusion appeared on her face again. After walking back and sitting down in the guest hall, Li looked at Miss Chun and said, "I heard about what happened in the cloth shop yesterday. Thank you very much." Zhang Zimo whispered, "It's me who should be thanking someone. What does it have to do with you?" It's the same. Third Miss Chun looked at Li Yi and her face and said with a smile, "Ah." Zhang Zimo was confused. She found that ever since Mrs. Chun knew her name, her attitude toward her had changed significantly. She was a little confused. At this moment, she still had a lot of questions in her mind, but she could only suppress these thoughts for now. Miss Chun looked at Zhang Zimo with a loving expression. Then she turned to look at Li Yi and asked, "Rui should be giving birth soon. How is her health recently?" Li Yi nodded and said, "There are still 3 months left. She is a martial artist, and has always been in good health." Zhang Zimo was surprised. She knew Li Yi very well. He was very casual when talking to anyone. Even with elders, he was not afraid to make some harmless jokes. This was the first time she had seen him so well behaved. He even used honorifics to address others. This attitude was unprecedented, so she couldn't help but be more confused. "Zimo, there isn't much to do at the brothel. Let's eat dumplings today." Wan Ruoqing walked in from outside. Seeing the situation in the hall, she was slightly startled and asked, "There are guests?" "This is Mrs. Chun." Zhang Zimo stood up and introduced her. Then she asked, "If you don't have anything else to do, why don't you eat here before leaving?" Miss Chun was startled for a moment, then a smile appeared on her face and she said, "Okay." She stood up and walked over. She naturally held Ruoqing's hand and asked with a smile, "You must be Miss Ruoqing. You are indeed a rare beauty." Wan Ruoqing felt a little guilty under her gaze. She didn't know why this Mrs. Chun, whom she met for the first time, was so enthusiastic. She secretly glanced at Zhang Zimo with a slightly confused expression. Zhang Zimo was also confused. She had never mentioned Sister Ruoqing to her. Why did she call out her name at first sight? At this moment, she was even more confused. She just wanted to ask Li Yi about it after Mrs. Chen left. Third Miss Chen seemed to realize that she had lost her composure. She let go of her hand and said, "Sorry for disturbing you today." "Not at all, not at all," Wan Ruoqing said hurriedly. Then she said, "I didn't expect to have guests today. I will go out and buy more stuffing." "Miss Ruoqing, you don't have to do that." Third Miss Chen looked back and said, "Xiao, or go out and buy some more." The servant girl called Xiao, or had a troubled expression. She walked to her side and whispered, "But miss, today is your birthday. Second master is at home. Go." "Yes, miss." The servant girl bit her lip and finally nodded. She walked out. Wan Ruoqing turned around and ordered, "Yu Xiaocui, go bring the stuffing and the dough I rolled this morning to the courtyard. We will go over there to make dumplings." "Ehe, time to make dumplings. Just watch. Can the dumplings you make be eaten?" "It's as if the dumplings you make are edible. We still have to rely on Sister Ruoqing." The two servant girls chattered and ran away quickly. Wan Ruoqing and Third Miss Chen chatted and laughed as they walked out. Zheng Zimo and Li Yi were a few steps behind. Zheng Zimo tilted her head and asked, "Have you and Madame Chen known each other for a long time?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's a long story. I will tell you later." Zheng Zimo nodded and glared at Li Yi. She asked, "Didn't you say that you are a martial arts master, and that nothing within a radius of 300 feet can escape your ears?" Bragging was just bragging. He was only slightly better than ordinary people. Within a radius of 300 feet he could hear other people's voices more clearly than ordinary people, but it wasn't that exaggerated. Otherwise he wouldn't have been caught by the old emperor hiding behind the bushes. 300 feet is a bit exaggerated. Actually, my skills are slightly weaker than 300 feet. How much is that? 3 feet. Is the distance of a door 3 inches? Li looked at her with some embarrassment and anger. "You are a girl. Why do you have so many questions?" The voice paused and then said, "There are no creases on my clothes just now. Here, and here lanterns are hung off. Have you invited everyone that should be invited? Check again. Who said they can't come? Ask again. If they are sick, then tell them to scram. Drunken Moon Brothel has many guests today. The food and wine will take some time to prepare. What kind of guests are they? Chase them out. If there is a problem with one dish today, they won't be able to open again." "What? 20 tables is too many? Just let them do as they say. Can't they just eat one table and throw one table away? All of you, be more attentive. If you mess up tonight's matters, then all of you can scram." In the house of High Duke, Chen Chong, the Minister of Ceremonies, did not look like an important official of the court. He walked quickly in the house and shouted without a care for his image. The servants in the house all held their breaths and were very careful. Today was the third lady's birthday, and the second elder had been preparing for it since half a month ago. Not only had he invited many distinguished guests, but the High Duke's public house had also been decorated with lanterns and streamers. At night, the capital city's most famous performers would perform on stage, and there would be no shortage of folk arts and acrobatics. According to the tradition of previous years, the capital city's most magnificent fireworks display would appear tonight. This tradition had been going on for more than 20 years without missing a single year. This was practically the most important event of the year in the House of High Duke. It was even more important than the birthday of the master and the second master. In the Chen family, mistakes in other areas could be forgiven, but today, even a small mistake would be met with heavy punishment. After inspecting the house of Chen for the third time, Chen Chong raised his head and drank a pot of cold tea before asking, "Where is the third lady? Is she not back yet?" A servant of the house of Chen immediately walked up and said, "The third lady went out early in the morning and has not returned yet." Chen Chong waved his hand. "Send someone to look for her. Don't let anything go wrong today." As soon as he finished speaking, a house of Chen guard hurried over from afar and whispered a few words in Chen Chong's ear. Chen Chong's face immediately darkened. He asked in a cold voice, "What did you say?" The third lady went to Willow Lane, and that Li Yi was there as well? The guard nodded. Yes, when I found out, I immediately came back to report. The few of you follow me out. Chen Chong ordered coldly and strode out of the house. A group of more than 10 people walked out of the house of Chen, causing some people on the street to stare in shock again. Most people did not know what had happened when the people in charge of the house of Ning Yuan yesterday attacked the house of Hai Duke, but those who were in the know knew very well that even with the Cui and Qin families' persuasion, the house of Hai Duke still paid a great price to settle the matter. Today, seeing the second master of the Qin family like this, who was going to be in trouble. Chapter 797. At a suitable time, the whole family gathered around to make dumplings, which was a very romantic thing. Although they were not a family for the time being, the four of them sat around the stone table. On Li Yi's side were Miss Chen and Zheng Zimo, and Wan Ruoqing sat opposite him, talking and making dumplings. It was a happy and harmonious atmosphere. Miss Zheng didn't know how to make dumplings. Miss Chen was born in an official's family, and had always been the daughter of a rich family. She had never cooked before, but after watching Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing make a few, she soon became good at making dumplings. Wan Ruoqing's dumplings were naturally the most beautiful of the four. Every dumpling was almost exactly the same. Compared with the strange shape of Zheng Zimo's, it was like heaven and earth. Li Yi looked at the results on her table and sighed. If you make them like this, they will all fall apart when you put them in the pot. Who would want to eat them? Zheng Zimo looked at the others' dumplings on the table, and then looked at her own. She blushed and whispered, I made them myself. I can eat them myself. Li Yi couldn't stand it anymore. After wrapping one, he directly grabbed her hand and put in the dough and stuffing. Look like this. First knead the two ends, then fold the dough at the back inward, and knead them together with the front. Let go of me. Zheng Zimo looked up in panic. Seeing Wan Ruoqing and Mrs. Chen looking at her with a smile, her heart was beating fast, and her face was even redder. She whispered, I learned. Li Yi clapped his hands, looked at her and said, Then you make one and let me have a look. After a while, seeing a dumpling that was even worse than before, Li Yi habitually rubbed his eyebrows and said helplessly, Forget it, you can make it however you want. Ha ha. Xiao Cui, who was watching from the side, laughed out loud. She pointed at Li Yi and said loudly, Li, you have an eye on your forehead. Only then did Li Yi realize that he had forgotten that his hands were still stained with flour. Xiao Cui and Xiao Zhu giggled behind him. Third Miss Chen and Wan Ruoqing also looked at him with smiles on their faces. As for first Miss Zheng, she laughed even more unscrupulously. Li Yi quickly reached out and wiped her face. The corners of his mouth twitched. Keep smiling. Ah. After the scream, the expression on Zheng Zimo's face was stunned at first. Then she showed a look of shame and anger. She dipped her palm in flour and pounced on Li Yi. However, with her skills, how could she be a match for Li Yi? Li Yi tilted his body and dodged her attack. He even wiped the other side of her face and laughed. That's more symmetrical. If I had another one on my forehead, I could directly go to the brothel to sing opera. I'm going to kill you. Wan Ruoqing and third Miss Chen continued to make dumplings, but there were two figures chasing each other in the yard, and there was a lot of chaos. The result of the flower fight was that Wan Ruoqing and third Miss Chen were making dumplings outside, while Li Yi and first Miss Zheng were washing their faces inside. With Li Yi's skills, although he could ensure that he didn't get any flour on his body, he couldn't really do that. If he annoyed first Miss Zheng, his ending would be even worse. It's all your fault. Zheng Zimo took a handkerchief to wipe her face and threw it into the water. She glared at Li Yi and said angrily. She was a woman, but she had actually played with him in the yard just now. Sister Ruoqing was fine because she was used to it. Mrs. Chen also saw it. Wasn't this a joke to her? Li Yi wet the handkerchief, wrung it out and wiped his face. He was very sensible and didn't argue. That's mine. Zheng Zimo widened her eyes and pointed at the handkerchief in his hand. Thinking that this wasn't the first time, she waved her hand and said, Forget it. Then she looked at Li Yi curiously and asked, What's going on between you and Mrs. Chen? Li Yi put down the handkerchief and stood up with a somewhat complicated expression. He sighed and said, It's a long story. The matter wasn't complicated, but it was a bit difficult to talk about it. Although what happened 20 years ago wasn't caused by him, it had an inseparable relationship with him. Every time he thought about the current situation, he felt extremely uncomfortable. How? Zhang Zibo stood there in a daze. Her expression was a bit absent-minded as she murmured, Mrs. Chun, she was a woman in the first place, so she could empathize with her. For a woman, this was such a cruel thing. 20 years ago, Madame Chun was about the same age as Xiao Chui, perhaps even 2 years younger than Xiao Chui. Now it had already been 20 years. To think that the extremely kind Madame Chun would actually have such an encounter. Her head full of white hair had actually turned white in just one night. Her eyes were a bit moist. She looked at Li Yi and suddenly felt a bit angry. You, Li Yi clarified. Not me. I didn't exist at that time. Zhang Zibo gritted her teeth and said, You men are all the same. Using and then abandoning. Not a good thing. Li Yi shook his head and said, I'll say it again. Some men do like to use and then abandon, but they are them, and I am me. I will not use and then abandon. You are. I am not. Yes. Say it again. Yes. Slap. Li Yi slapped her butt. We'll talk about it later? Zhang Zibo was stunned on the spot. A certain part of her body felt numb, but more of it was shame. Her pretty face was flushed, and even the roots of her ears were red. She looked up at Li Yi and said hatefully, Yes. Slap. Li Yi looked at her and asked again, Is it? Yes. Slap. Yes, it is. Slap. 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 No. The numb feeling came again and again. Her face was so red that it seemed like it was about to drip blood. And her voice was already sobbing. Slap. Another wave of numbness came. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi in disbelief. I already said it's not. Li Yi looked down at her and said with some embarrassment, Sorry, I hit you casually. Why don't you say no again? It was never too late to mend the fold after the sheep were lost. A prodigal son's repentance was more valuable than gold. And there was still a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. To be able to recognize one's mistakes was a good thing. And Li still had to learn from Miss Sung on this point. Miss, why is your face so red? Xiao Chui asked Zhang Zibo in surprise when the two of them walked out of the backyard. Li explained, The water is too hot, and your miss is thin-skinned, so her face turned red. Xiao Chui nodded, not really understanding. She didn't know whether the water was hot or not, but she knew that every time the miss was alone with Li, her face would turn red. Wan Ruoqing looked at the dumplings on the plate and said, It's just the few of us. We're almost done. When Li Yi helped to clean up the tray on the stone table, there was a sudden knock on the door. Open the door. Open the door. Li Yi, don't hide. I know you're inside. Li Yi frowned, dusted off the flour on his hands, and walked toward the door. Third Miss Chun was startled and murmured, Second brother? At a certain moment, the knocking stopped. Chun Chong took a few steps back and looked at the two people who suddenly appeared in front of him. He asked, Who are you? The dozen guards behind him also looked at the two warily, as if they were facing a great enemy. One of the men said expressionlessly, I want to ask, who are you and what are you doing here? Creak. The door opened from the inside and Li Yi walked out. Young master. The two men looked at him at the same time and lowered their heads slightly. Li Yi nodded, then looked down and asked, May I know what business you have here, Lord Supervisor? Chun Chong's face was filled with anger. You dare to ask me? Where is my third sister? Hand her over. Second brother. Third Miss Chun hurried out and said, Second brother, I'm fine. Chun Chong looked at her nervously and asked, Miao Yu, did this bastard do anything to you? Li Yi looked at him, his eyes narrowed, and his fists clenched. He didn't offend anyone, so how did he become a bastard? If not for Third Miss Chun being here, he would definitely let this guy know what it meant to be a bastard. Chun Chong glanced at Li Yi, then supported Third Miss Chun and said, Third sister, let's go. Follow second brother home. The preparations have already been made. We can't leave now. Third Miss Chun shook her head. Chun Chong frowned and said, Don't mess around. Hurry and follow second brother home. The guests are all waiting. Third Miss Chen shook her head again and said, Mia, you just made some dumplings here. Why don't second brother stay and eat some with us? Dumplings? Chen Chong's expression froze. Third sister made them personally? He found it hard to believe. Ever since he was young, his third sister had never done such things. As the daughter of the Chen clan, who would dare to make her do such manual labor? Even as her elder brother, he had never eaten the dumplings she made personally. Third Miss Chen waved her powder-stained hands and said with some embarrassment, I just learned how to make them, so I didn't do it well. Chen Chong stood there in a daze. After thinking about it, he nodded slightly. Then eat some. Chapter 798. Since the third young lady had spoken, Li naturally could not ignore her and shut Chong Chen outside the door. Come in. Li only glanced at Chong Chen and said expressionlessly. Although he was a magnanimous man and did not mind what Chong Chen had said to him, his expression was naturally not pleasant. He was having a good meal here, and this shameless outsider had the nerve to come over? Halfway there, he realized that the dumplings had run out. The dumplings made by 4 people were only enough for 4 people and 2 servant girls. With the addition of 1 more person, it was not quite enough. Turning back, he looked at Chong Chen and said calmly, The dumplings are out. Lord Chen, go and buy some more. You, as a dignified minister with the backing of the House of Duke, when had he ever been ordered around like this? Anger appeared on Chong Chen's face. He was about to flare up when the third young lady waved her hand and said with a smile, I'll ask Xiao Air to buy some. She just bought some and knows the place. Let me go. Chong Chen shook his head. Third young lady had personally made the dumplings. How could the fillings bought by a servant girl compare to the ones he had bought? He was just dissatisfied with the rascal's attitude. After glaring at Li Yi, he strode out. The third young lady took a few steps forward and looked at the 2 girls. She said apologetically, I am a guest and made the decision without permission. I hope Zue Mo and Ruoqing will not take it to heart. No. Ruoqing shook her head and said with a smile, It's just an extra pair of chopsticks. In Li Yi's view, this was not just an extra pair of chopsticks. Every time Chen Chong, this arrogant fellow, saw him, it was as if he was talking through his nostrils. This made him very uncomfortable. However, in terms of rank, a 5th-rank official was 4 ranks lower than him. Who gave him this confidence? If she saw him walking around in front of her, this meal would lose some of its flavor. However, he did not want to make things difficult for the third young lady. So he shook his head and walked to the kitchen. Although they were eating dumplings today, they couldn't just eat dumplings. Other than the main course, they had to stir-fry a dozen dishes and make some soup. Not far from Willow Lane, there was a food market. The people of the capital had seen people buying meat stuffing, but they had never seen a mighty group of more than 10 people. The person at the head of the group was dressed in luxurious clothing, and his expression was not angry but dignified. One look and you could tell that he was a high-ranking official. To arrange such a large group to come to the market was just to buy 2 tails of meat stuffing. Heavens, am I seeing things? That person just now seems to be Supervisor Chen. Which Supervisor Chen? There's another Chen informant. The one from Duke Chen's residence. Yesterday, he brought a few dozen people to kick down the door of Ning Yuanho's residence. Impossible. What kind of status does he have? How could he come here to buy minced meat? How is it impossible? I saw him with my own eyes yesterday. As the crowd discussed, the butcher shop assistant was already leaning against a pillar in the shop. He couldn't stop himself from sliding down. Duke Chen, Supervisor Chen. These words were enough to make a commoner like him, who had never seen the world, go weak in the knees. Supervisor Chen naturally didn't know, and didn't care about the commotion on the street. At this moment, he was sitting around the table in the small courtyard. He asked with concern, Miao Yu, you've packed so much. Are you tired? Do you want to rest for a while? Zeng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing stood far away on the other side. They withdrew their gazes and looked at each other, seeing the surprise and confusion in each other's eyes. The person who was at Madame Chen's beck and call, asking about her well-being, was he really the current Supervisor Chen? However, When they thought about the fact that the one cooking in the kitchen was a third-rank Dr. Jean Ziguang, a fifth-rank supervisor, Chen didn't mean much. There was another knock on the door. Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu were busy in the kitchen. Zheng Zimo walked over and opened the courtyard door. Zimo. Zheng Shichen walked in with a smile on his face. He saw two figures he had never seen before at the stone table in the courtyard. He was startled and immediately said, "Are there any guests? I'll leave first then. I won't disturb you anymore. I'll come back tomorrow." He turned around and walked out the door. Only then did a voice come from behind him. "Wait a moment." Zheng Shichen turned around with a puzzled expression. "Is there anything else, Zimo?" Zheng Zimo looked at him with a hesitant expression. She quickly lowered her head and said in a small voice, "Since you're here, let's have a meal before you leave." Zheng Shichen turned around and looked around. When he found that he was the only one here, his body suddenly trembled. He pointed at himself in disbelief and asked, Me? Come in first." Zheng Zimo nodded and slowly walked into the courtyard. Okay. Zheng Shichen stood in place for a long time before nodding. There was a trace of joy on his face as he strode in. The first 2 times he drank a cup of herbal tea, but this time he could even eat a meal. This speed of progress made him feel as if he was in a dream. "Assistant Minister Zheng, why are you here?" An extremely surprised voice rang out in front of him. Zheng Shichen felt that this voice was somewhat familiar. When he looked up, he said in shock, "Official Chen, why are you here?" Seeing Chen Chong here, a trace of wariness flashed across his face. Almost subconsciously, he took a step forward and stood in front of Zheng Zimo. "What are you doing?" Chen Chong glanced at him in confusion, but the expression on his face quickly turned into one of schadenfreude. "I only bought 2 ounces of stuffing. If you want to eat, go buy it yourself." Zheng Shichen looked back. Seeing that Zheng Zimo was fine, he finally relaxed. When he turned back, confusion once again appeared on his face. "What do you mean, Official Chen?" Chen Chong glanced at him. "What do I mean? If you want to eat, go buy it yourself. There's no extra here." He had long been dissatisfied with the fact that an official of the court was ordered to buy meat stuffing. If he could order around a 4th-rank assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, he would naturally feel better. Li Yi poked his head out of the kitchen and saw Zheng Shichen standing in the yard. He knew that there was going to be another eyesore today. Zheng Zimo shook her head and said, "I'll have Xiao Chui go buy it." Zheng Shichen had already understood the ins and outs of the matter. After seeing Li Yi, his worried heart also relaxed. He smiled and said, "Since Official Chen does it himself, I won't break the rules. I'll go out for a bit and be back soon." Inside the market, the butcher had just walked out of the shadow brought by the official when he saw a customer walk in. "Sir, what would you like to order?" 2 ounces of meat stuffing," a middle-aged man in a dark robe said. The waiter wiped the cloth around his waist and said, "All right, please wait a moment, sir. I'll cut it up right away." "Assistant Minister Zheng, is it really you?" Hearing the voice behind him, Zheng Shichen turned around and saw the man walking in. He looked left and right and said in surprise, "Censor Qi?" Since last year, the censors of the Imperial Censorate especially liked to wear casual clothes and wander the streets. It wasn't strange to see a supervising censor in the market. Censor Qi looked at him in surprise. "Sir Zheng, what are you doing?" Zheng Shichen smiled and said, "Buying 2 ounces of meat stuffing to make dumplings." That Censor Qi's face revealed a look of surprise. He cupped his hands and said, "I really didn't expect that Sir Zheng, as an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, would be so thrifty. You must have come to this kind of place in order to sympathize with the people, investigate the prices of goods, and punish illegal peddlers, right?" "Ah." Zheng Shichen's expression froze. Censor Qi was immediately filled with respect. When Sir Zheng was in charge of the Yamen, he still went deep into the people to understand the people's feelings. He is truly a role model for us officials. I will write a memorial tomorrow. Ministry of Revenue, Assistant Minister, punish illegal peddlers? The butcher stood in a daze behind the stall. His face was pale and his body trembled. The meat stuffing in his hand fell to the chopping board, and he fell to his knees. He shouted, "Sir, you have wronged me. I am only a worker." About the matter of raising the price of meat. He pointed a finger at the fat middle-aged man behind him. It was all done by my shopkeeper. Sung Shichen cupped his hands at Sensor Chi and said, Sir Chi is too kind. I still have some matters to attend to, so I will take my leave first. Sensor Chi also cupped his hands. Take care, Sir Zeng. Sung Shichen took out a few copper coins and placed them on the chopping board. He picked up the meat stuffing and left without looking at the butcher. The butcher kneeled on the ground. He could only hear the sound of teeth grinding behind him. Wang ergo. He turned around and saw that the shopkeeper had taken a boning knife from the wall and was glaring at him fiercely. Raising the price of meat. I will chop you up. Chapter 799. The dumplings were all wrapped up and were just waiting to be put into the pot. Third young Mistress Chun and the two maidservants sat in the courtyard and chatted. The chores in the kitchen were almost done. The two maidservants could not interfere in the following matters and stood at the back, pouring tea and water. Li Yi busied himself in the kitchen while Chen Chong and Sung Shichen stood at the entrance of the kitchen, watching. The Assistant Minister of Revenue, Sung Shichen, still had a look of surprise on his face. He shook his head and said, If my colleagues in court were to find out that the dignified dean of the Mathematics Academy, Grand Scholar Jean Ziguang Lu, is actually doing this kind of kitchen work, I wonder how many jaws would drop. Chen Chong snorted coldly, his eyes filled with disdain as he said, It's clearly an insult to the culture. It's more likely they'll laugh their heads off. Damn it, he had always disliked this guy. Not only did he not make a move, but he was also standing here making sarcastic remarks. Li looked back and said indifferently, Come over and peel off those scallions. Chen Chong sneered. Are you ordering this official? If you don't want to peel it, then please leave. Li didn't even turn his head. I think you're used to living a luxurious life. You probably won't care about a plate of dumplings. Where's the green onion? The corner. After marinating the fish, Li said, If Sung Darren has nothing else to do, why don't you mash those cloves of garlic into garlic paste? All right. Sung Shichen readily agreed without any resistance. In the courtyard, Miss Chen looked at Zeng Zimo and said in confusion, Zimo and Assistant Minister Zeng are both surnamed Zeng. Could it be? Zeng Zimo smiled and said, It's all in the past. Third Miss Chen saw that her expression was a little gloomy, so she didn't ask further. The three of them chatted about something else. From time to time, sounds could be heard coming from the kitchen not far away. I asked you to peel the scallions, not to peel them all. Look at the scallions you peeled. What's left? This was Li Yi's angry voice. You dare to shout at this official? Chen Chong's voice was similarly enraged. What's wrong with that? Do you have a problem with that? This official. You have something to say, right? If you have something to say, go out and say it. Forget it, forget it. There are only a few green onions left. There's nothing for you to waste. Go take this trash out and throw it away. What do you mean by supervisor? You can't do anything right, but you're good at spoiling things. You can only throw trash away. Chen Chong angrily walked out of the kitchen with a dustpan in hand. After taking 2 steps, he turned back and asked, Where should I throw it? Wan Ruoqing stared blankly in a certain direction. She hesitated for a moment before asking, There. Third Miss Chen shook her head and said, It doesn't matter. Let them be. It will be more lively this way. She looked at the 2 women with a smile on her face and asked, You must have known that child for a long time, right? Sung Zimo was confused. Which child? Wan Ruoqing smiled and nodded. We first met in Qing and Fu. It has been almost 2 years since then. While the 3 of them were talking about these things, a fragrant aroma gradually drifted out of the kitchen. Usually, there were only the 4 of them in the small courtyard. Most of their meals were at the stone table in the courtyard. If the weather was bad, they would eat inside the house. Li Yi would occasionally eat here, so it wouldn't be crowded with one more person at the table. Any more and it would be hard to sit down. As outsiders, Assistant Minister Zeng and Supervisor Chen could only sit at the stone table outside. This was a special seat for distinguished guests that Li Yi had specially arranged for them. After they sat down, Li took a few bites and then stood up. Everyone eat first. I'll go cook the dumplings. Wan Ruoqing stood up. I'll go help. You guys eat, I can do it alone. Li shook his head and walked toward the kitchen. Third Miss Chen's gaze moved away from the door and asked, does he often cook? He never cares about what outsiders say. When he was in Qing and Fu, he often cooked himself. Wan Ruoqing nodded and asked, is the food to your liking? A gratified smile appeared on Third Miss Chen's face. Even the imperial chefs in the palace are only SOSO. The three of them talked for a while. After a while, Zhang Zimmel looked outside with some confusion and murmured, why isn't he back yet? I'll go and see. She got up and walked out of the courtyard, heading in the direction of the kitchen. In the kitchen, Li added a fire under the stove and washed his hands in a basin on the side. Then he picked up the bowl and ate the dumplings in the bowl one mouthful at a time. Let's call them dumplings for now. The dumplings made by Miss Zheng looked like dumplings before they were put into the pot. After they were put into the pot, they were a mixture of dough, meat filling, and water. The taste was really the most unique dumplings he had ever eaten. Well done. We're all waiting for you inside, and you're actually stealing food here. A surprised and excited voice came from behind. Then Li Yi's wrist was grabbed by someone. Miss Zheng looked at Li Yi with a proud expression as if she had caught a thief who had stolen something. What stealing food? You're a girl. Watch your words. Li Yi was still holding the bowl in his hand. He said, don't move, be careful not to spill it. It was very rare to see Li Yi embarrassed. Miss Zheng raised her chin and said with a little pride, you were stealing food, and I caught you. You still want to deny it? Li looked at her and said, please, stealing food is a matter of two people. One person can't do it. Why can't one person do it? Zhang Zimmel looked at him with some confusion. As soon as she said this, she understood what he had just said. Her face turned red, and she glared at him. She whispered, Lecher, don't worry about stealing food. Li put down the bowl and said, the dumplings are almost ready. Help me bring them in later. Zhang Zimmel walked to the front of the stove and said, I want to eat the dumplings I made. You made them? Li shook his head and said, I threw them away. They are all scattered in the pot. How can I bring them up? You. Zhang Zimmel looked at him with some embarrassment. Those were the dumplings she had painstakingly made. Although they were not good-looking, it was still her first time. How could he? Her eyes inadvertently caught a glimpse of the bowl that Li Yi had placed on the side, and her expression was slightly startled. Of course, there were not dumplings in the bowl. The dough and meat were scattered, and there was no dumpling shape at all. The only one that was somewhat similar was a dumpling with two round ears, which she had made herself. You. Her voice softened, and she lowered her head, not daring to look at Li Yi. Although she was a little flustered and bewildered at the moment, there was another kind of sweet and warm feeling in her heart. Li took out the bowl and chopsticks, intending to rinse it with water again. He said, help me keep an eye on it. When the water boils twice more, you can put it into the pot. Okay. Zhang Zimmel nodded and made a vague syllable from her throat. She stood on tiptoe and leaned over to look into the pot. When she made such a posture, her body would naturally bend down in an arc. This familiar arc made Li Yi's hand feel a strange feeling, and his mind couldn't help but recall the scene in the morning. When Zhang Zimmel inadvertently turned her head, she saw that he was staring at a certain part of her body. Her body stiffened, and that part seemed to begin to become numb again. Her breathing was a little rapid, and she said angrily, where are your eyes looking? Ahem ahem. Li Yi coughed dryly, looked at the pot and said, it's about time, let's start the pot. Zhang Zimmel's face was blushing. She looked back and whispered, it's not boiling yet. It's not boiling yet. It's not bad. In addition to the dumplings, the dishes on the table were also very sumptuous. They were originally packed according to the number of people. Li brought out the last bowl of dumplings and said with a smile, everyone try the taste first. Delicious. Xiao Chui ate a dumpling. Although it was scalded and kept sucking in air, her chopsticks had already reached out. Her eyes inadvertently glanced at Li Yi, and as if she had discovered something, she pointed at the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, Lee, did you secretly eat in the kitchen just now? Splash! Hearing the words secretly eat, Zeng Zimo's wrist trembled, and the dumpling she had already picked up fell back into the bowl. In the courtyard, next to the stone table, Chen Chong picked up a dumpling, dipped it in vinegar, and took a bite. Then he was startled, raised his head, and asked doubtfully, "Assistant Minister Zeng, don't you feel that this dumpling is a little raw?" Chapter 800. I think it's okay. Seng Shichen shook his head. Although official Chen has some old grudges with Ma Keeley, what sort of person is he? Why would he use such a method to take revenge on you? I think so too. Chen Chong nodded and swallowed the entire dumpling. Seng Shichen smiled. He picked up a dumpling, a smile on his face. But when he put it into his mouth, his smile froze. Swallowing with difficulty, Seng Shichen put down his chopsticks. He looked at Chen Chong and said, "Official Chen, this dumpling seems a little raw." A quarter of an hour later, the two returned to their original positions. Who would have thought that two high officials of the court would personally start a fire and boil water for a few half-cooked dumplings? Official Chen, your face. Haha, Assistant Minister Zeng is not much better. Let him be, we'll talk after eating. Seng Shichen picked up a dumpling, dipped it in vinegar and asked, "If I remember correctly, today should be third young Mrs. birthday. Why is official Chen not at home? Why is he here?" Chen Chong ate the dumpling and said expressionlessly, "After he was released from office, official Zeng did not return home. Was he observing the people, or?" He looked into the room and said in astonishment, "Could it be that Miss Zeng is Sir Tsung's illegitimate daughter who was left behind by the common people? Speaking of which, why do I feel that between Sir Tsung and her, there is actually... Official Chen, if there is nothing important in the future, do not come here." Seng Shichen interrupted him. He looked at him and said, "If there is something, official Chen is the minister of the imperial court and is very busy. Why would he need to come to this small willow lane? Don't you think so?" Chen Chong put down his chopsticks, his eyes narrowing. "Assistant Minister Zeng, what do you mean?" Seng Shichen put down his chopsticks and met his gaze. "I have a personal relationship with the former Assistant Minister of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan." The former Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, accepted bribes for personal gain, and is still imprisoned in the imperial prison. A dangerous light flashed in Chen Chong's eyes as he said in a low voice, "What does this have to do with what Lord Zeng said?" It's very normal for Lord Chen to not admit to this matter. After all, even Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice fell from power in a muddle-headed manner. He did not know that the person behind it was actually Lord Chen. Seng Shichen shook his head and said, "I have no other intentions in saying these words. I just want to tell Lord Chen." He looked into the room, and a hint of warmth flashed across his face. When he turned back, his eyes were cold. "Stay away from drunk ink." Chen Chong's eyes narrowed and he said word by word, "Seng Shichen, are you threatening me?" "I don't dare." Seng Shichen's expression had already calmed down. He saluted and said, "Lord Chen has the House of High Dukes behind him. How would I dare to threaten Lord Chen? It's just that Zimo is the only descendant of my big brother in this world. I can't let anything happen to her. Although the Zeng family is small, if Lord Chen insists, the House of High Dukes will not be happy." "Your big brother, Tsing Shiji?" Chen Chong glanced at him and murmured, "I see." He picked up his chopsticks again, shook his head and said, "Back then, I felt that you were more suitable to be an official than your big brother. Back then, the Zeng family was suppressed and ostracized by the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Later, they were framed and their salaries were touched. The Zeng family's direct line of descent suffered. No wonder, no wonder. Later, the former assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue was found by the imperial censorate to have accepted large amounts of bribes, and was sentenced to 500 miles of exile. I'm afraid this road to hell is more than 500 miles. Seng Shichen shook his head and said, "Only Assistant Minister Fong himself knows this." Chen Chong ate another dumpling and said casually, "The Intelligence Bureau has not found out about that matter. How did you know? Sung Shichen smiled and did not speak. I thought that Lord Zeng had relied on the support of the Cui family and the King of Shu to climb from a small head of the Ministry of Revenue to where he is now. It seems that I have underestimated Lord Zeng. Chun Chong shook his head and picked up his chopsticks. To express my apology, here a dumpling to you. Sung Shichen also picked up his chopsticks and nodded. Thank you, Lord Chen. The invisible confrontation between the two of them had been resolved by these two dumplings. For them, there were some things that did not need to be said. They had already reached a consensus on that dumpling. As Chun Chong ate the dumplings, his gaze would occasionally glance into the room. From here, he could faintly see what was going on in the room. Although he could not clearly hear the contents of the conversation, he could still hear the occasional light laughter of the woman. Chun Chong's gaze paused on the face of the white-haired woman. She was currently smiling and talking to the woman beside her. This kind of smile. How long had it been since he had seen it on her face? Even when he held a birthday banquet for her every year that would shake the entire capital in terms of grandeur and grandeur, even noble consort Chui's birthday banquet could not compare to it. He had never seen such a smile on her face. Of course, she often smiled, but that kind of smile made him feel even more sad. In the next moment, his gaze landed on the only young man in the room. Sung Shichen's gaze was also in the room, but it fell on the other woman. Back then, the little girl who only knew how to follow behind him and call him second uncle, had already grown into such a person. In the past, Big Brother often grumbled at him, complaining that he had spoiled her too much, causing his daughter to treat him, this second uncle, more than her father. However, it had been a whole 13 years since he had heard her call him second uncle. Sung Shichen sighed in his heart, his gaze also turning to that young man. Both of their gazes were extremely complicated. At a certain moment, when the two of them retracted their gazes met in the air. Some things are better left unsaid when there are so many people around. Sung Shichen finished the last dumpling and put down his chopsticks. Chun Chong picked up another dumpling. Assistant Minister Tsung, there is no harm in speaking. Lord Chen, what do you think are the chances of the King of Shu succeeding? Chun Chong's chopsticks were about to enter his mouth, but his body trembled when he heard this, and he put the dumpling back into the bowl. As both core members of the King of Shu's faction, it was very normal for the two of them to analyze the current situation and plan for the King of Shu. However, both of them knew that this time was completely different from the past. Chun Chong said in a low voice, when the King of Shu was in the capital, his actions had already bitterly disappointed countless supporters in the court. Those who were wavering probably also gave up on that idea. Sung Shichen continued, in the future, the School of Mathematics will definitely be heavily relied upon by the court. Minister Qin has said many times that the Ministry of Revenue should recruit more talents from the School of Mathematics. However, in the School of Mathematics, there is no one from the King of Shu's faction. The person in charge is Prince Jin. After the accounts were checked, the King of Shu and the Cui clan's power in the court was almost completely wiped out. Their arrangements over the decades were destroyed in a day. The Cui clan's foundation was almost destroyed by foreign merchants. They could not interfere in the matter of the School of Mathematics, and they have lost the support of the people. Prime Minister Qin's attitude has been ambiguous recently. The most frightening thing is His Majesty's attitude. The eldest princess is temporarily in charge of the court, and the King of Shu is not allowed to return to the capital for noble consort Chui's birthday. But if the King of Shu is defeated and a new emperor takes the throne, what will happen to the Chun clan and the Zeng clan in the future? The voices of the two of them became softer and softer, and their expressions became darker and darker. In the hall, Li Yi brought over a bowl of longevity noodles that he had personally cooked. He smiled and said, I wish you a happy birthday. This kind of birthday greeting was extremely hasty, but Third Miss Chen's face was full of smiles. She took the small bowl from his hand and held his hand. She nodded and said, Good, good. Chapter 801. Duke Chen's Residence. Although night had yet to fall, the entire Chen residence was filled with jubilation. The residence was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Guests arrived and chatted with each other. Servants and maids walked among them, serving delicacies and wine. The atmosphere was joyous. To the Chun residents, today was even more lively than the New Year, Lantern Festival and Mid-Autumn Festival. This lowly official greets Lord Chun. Today there is only Chun Qing, not Lord Chun. Long time no see, congratulations on your promotion, Lord Chun. Today is my youngest sister's birthday, let's not talk about these things. Sit over there. Lord Qin, welcome. Cui Lu, bring Madam Qin to the ladies in the inner courtyard. The Chun family's status in the imperial court was not low, and it could even be said that it played an important role. This was not only because of Minister Chen's prestige and connections in the past, but also because the Chen brothers held important positions in the imperial court. One was a minister, and the other was now an official's attendant. Anyone who was invited to today's banquet more or less had the intention to curry favor with them. Chen Qing personally welcomed a few important guests, then turned around and frowned. What time is it? Why haven't third sister and second brother returned yet? A servant replied respectfully, Master, second master went out to fetch third miss a long time ago. I don't know why, but there has been no news yet. The banquet is about to begin. Send someone out to take a look. Yes. Chen Qing gave an order, and the servant immediately retreated and ran out of the mansion. In Willow Alley, third Miss Chen walked out of the courtyard and smiled at the two girls. I still have to thank you for your hospitality today. Sorry for the trouble. Wan Ruoqing bowed slightly and said, You are too polite. It is just a simple meal. Although it is simple, it is better than all the luxurious clothes and food. Third Miss Chen looked at Li Yi, who was standing at the back. After a long time she said, It is getting late. We have disturbed you for so long. We should go back. Be careful. Chen Chong helped her down the stairs and looked back at Li Yi. His brows were still furrowed, but there was no longer the intense hostility from before. Drunk inked, I'm going back too. Seng Shichen smiled, then turned and walked towards the entrance of the alley. When this assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue and Minister Chen parted ways at the mouth of the alley, they looked at each other again. After exchanging some information, they got into their respective carriages. In the courtyard, Li Yi and Zheng Zimo sat on either side of a stone table. Seeing this third young lady again today made his heart feel uneasy again. The Chen family had always been the most solid force of the King of Shu's faction. It was also a force that he and the eldest princess could not avoid in the future. However, the Chen family was different from the Cui family, the Yu family and the Qin family. The Li family owed third Miss Chen too much. Since ancient times, conflicts between factions had always been cold-blooded and heartless. However, if they really used unscrupulous means to achieve their goals and caused her to suffer even a little more harm, even if their ultimate goal was achieved, they would never be able to live in peace for the rest of their lives. This matter needed to be discussed at length. Zheng Zimo put a cup of tea on the table in front of him, looked at him and said softly, Are you still thinking about Mrs. Chen? Li took a sip of tea and nodded slightly. She thought about it and said, This matter is not your fault. Li shook his head. But it is still related to me. Feng's head had poked in twice from outside. Li looked up and said, It's getting late. She nodded. Well, you can go back. I have a lot of things to do in the next few days. I may not have much time to come. Rui's due date was less than 3 months. Li did not intend to let the old lady and the other women take her to pray for Buddha's blessing all day. After a pause he said, If there is anything urgent, send someone to find me. The new house is not far from here. You should know where it is, right? Then, wait a minute. She was stunned and hesitated for a moment. Then she turned around and walked quickly back to the room. Soon she came out and handed something to Li Yi saying, It's not good. It's not as good as Sister Ruoqing. If you don't like it, throw it away. Li looked at the baby clothes in his hand. It was indeed not as good as the one made by Ruoqing, but compared with the one she made before, it was like heaven and earth. Her needlework was just like her culinary skills. It was incredible that she could make such great progress in such a short period of time. It was enough to guess how much effort she had put into this area these days. Let me see. Lee grabbed her left hand, and sure enough, there were quite a few dark red spots on her white, jade-like fingers. This time she did not struggle. Seeing his slightly distressed expression, a smile appeared on her face. The dull pain in her hand did not hurt so much. At the door of the room in the back, a figure had come out. Seeing the situation in the courtyard, he slowly retreated. Lee was a little touched and angry. He sighed and said, "Don't be so silly in the future." She shook her head and said, "It's never wrong to learn more things. Besides, in the future, I have to do a few things for my child." "That's true." Lee nodded and said, "But you have to be careful. No one is like you, hurting your hand when making clothes. Anyway, it's still early. If you do it slowly, there will be a lot of clothes. It will save me the trouble of buying them outside." She slightly lowered her head, feeling a little disappointed. Yes, the only thing she could do was to sew a few small clothes for him and Miss Lu's child. She subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand from Li Yi's hand, but he held it even tighter. Li Yi looked down at her and asked, "Do you want to have a son or a daughter?" "I think a daughter is better, but it's not up to us. When the time comes, it still depends on luck." Hearing this, her body trembled. And then her face immediately turned red. She struggled even harder to break free from Li Yi's hand. Who wants to have a child with you?" Li Yi could only see the back of a panicked fleeing figure. He said helplessly, "Why are you running?" In the future, not now." Some things were vague. It would indeed save a lot of trouble if it was not said or poked through the layer of paper. But this was very unfair to her. As a man, he was a little less responsible. The timing was not very right. But in the coming days, he had a lot of things to do. It would be difficult for them to meet again. Li Yi thought for a long time and still felt that it was better to say these words. "Miss, why are you covered in the blanket? Is it very cold?" Inside the room, Xiao Chui stood in front of the bed and looked at the figure who was curled up in the blanket. She listened carefully and heard a low sobbing sound coming from under the quilt. "Miss, are you crying?" Panic immediately appeared on her face, and she said anxiously, "Did Li bully you?" "Miss, don't cry. I'll go find him now." "Don't." A figure quickly jumped up from the bed. Zheng Zimo grabbed Xiao Chui's arm, and her face was full of tears. She shook her head repeatedly. "Don't go, it's not his fault." "It's me," Xiao Chui asked doubtfully. "But miss, why are you crying?" Because. She looked out of the window in a daze, then held Xiao Chui in her arms and whispered, "Because today's dumplings are too delicious." The young girl's face revealed an extremely surprised expression. She cried like this because the dumplings were delicious. In the past 10 years, she had never realized that the young miss actually liked to eat dumplings so much. In the courtyard, a figure sat at the stone table in a daze, looking at the full moon that had already risen into the sky. There was a smile on his face, and his clear eyes were like a pool of green water, but there were sparkles flashing in them. Fong sat in the carriage and looked back at the carriage. He sighed and said, "Son-in-law, you're so wise. It's too troublesome to have a boy and have to raise him up to marry him. I also think it's better to have a daughter." Chapter 802. Husband, you came back a little later than usual today. In the room, candlelight flickered. Li Yi moved the wooden basin away, helped Rui dry her feet, and covered her with the quilt. Then he said, "I was indeed delayed by something today." He roughly told Rui what had happened that day. Rui leaned against the headboard and curled her feet under the quilt. She said, "Speaking of which, I haven't seen Mrs. Chun for a long time." Li Yi sighed. He didn't know what to say for a while. "I'm just a woman. I shouldn't say anything." Rui looked at him and said, "But I think that in the future, no matter what happens to the Li family and the Chun family, we must treat Mrs. Chun well." Li nodded. The complexity of this matter couldn't be explained in a few words. He gently picked up Rui, laid her on the bed, and covered her with the quilt. He said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early, my wife." Rui nodded and closed her eyes obediently. "Good night, husband." "Good night." Li kissed her gently on the forehead. He walked over to turn off the light and left the room. The moon was very bright that night. There were lanterns hanging in the courtyard, so it wasn't very dark. Li Yi took some desserts from the kitchen and a pot of grape wine. He sat at the stone table in the courtyard. He had cooked a lot today, but he didn't eat much. He was a little hungry now. He ate the desserts and drank the wine, thinking about something. Many things had happened these days. He needed to think about them from time to time. The most important thing was to find another job for old Fong. With a grandmaster like Su Lao by his side, his existence seemed a lot more unnecessary. Secondly, since the old emperor handed over the affairs of the court to the eldest princess, he really didn't care about anything. He moved to Hibiscus Garden with the empress, Yan Fei and the others and retired early. According to the eldest princess, he actually asked the imperial guards to open up a vegetable garden in Hibiscus Garden. He had already planted the seeds himself. When spring came next year, he would be able to eat the vegetables he grew himself. Other than that, he played on the streets with Shanning and Yongning every day under the protection of a group of hidden guards. He led the dogs up the mountain to chase rabbits and set traps to catch pheasants. Of course, he didn't chase them himself. Li Yi was starting to wonder if things really turned in the opposite direction when they reached an extreme. The old emperor had been working hard his whole life, but in his old age, he had completely let himself loose and neglected his duties. If this went on, he would not be able to keep his chastity. However, after staying away from the affairs of the court, he went to bed early and woke up early every day. Even the frequency of his illness was reduced. Li Yi didn't remind him too much about this. Winter was coming, and at that time, he would have to obediently stay in Hibiscus Garden like a turtle. Winter was the season of asthma. If he survived this winter, there would be hope for the next year. Li Yi was also worried about the eldest princess, who was personally in charge of the court affairs. Although she often participated in the court affairs, it was the first time that she was acting in the place of the emperor. There would be too many problems in the process. Therefore, during this period, whether it was Li Yi entering the palace or the eldest princess leaving the palace, they were very frequent. Moreover, apart from the court affairs, the two of them had other more important things to discuss. Of course, these things were secrets only the two of them could know. They couldn't let others hear about it. Li Xian couldn't, and the old emperor couldn't. Besides, there was something else, about himself. For him, compared to other things, this matter was more troublesome. Mississippi Lu, who was wearing a thin shirt, came over and sat opposite him. She pinched a piece of pastry and poured herself a glass of grape wine. She was very busy these days and often didn't eat at home. There were not many opportunities for the two of them to sit quietly and face each other like this. When she poured the second glass of wine, she slowly said, "I'm out of silver. Take 100,000 taels first. We'll talk about it if it's not enough." Lu Meng was his family's power. Li Yi wouldn't be stingy on spending money on this. He gave her the silver, and she could do whatever she wanted. She didn't expect him to be so straightforward this time. Mississippi Lu looked at him in surprise. "Rui," Li Yi thought for a moment, suddenly sat up straight and looked at her. "I have a question to ask you." Mississippi Lu pinched another piece of pastry and said lightly, "Speak." "I have a friend." Li Yi looked at her and said seriously, "This friend of mine has encountered some troubles recently." Mississippi Lu looked at him calmly and waited for him to continue. Li Yi looked at her and continued, "This friend of mine has fallen in love with a woman. That woman is very good, but he has a wife. His wife is very gentle and beautiful. He also loves his wife very much. This friend of yours, don't tell me his surname is also Li?" Mississippi Lu suddenly looked at him and asked. Li Yi nodded and said, "It's just a coincidence." "A coincidence? This friend of yours, other than that woman, has a lot of women outside?" Li Yi thought for a moment and counted with his fingers under the stone table. He shook his head and said, "Not a lot. It's also a coincidence that this friend of yours, other than his wife, has a powerful and beautiful wife's sister and a lovely servant girl?" Li Yi shook his head. "Haha. How can there be so many coincidences? Whose coincidences are they?" Mississippi Lu lowered her head and poured another cup of wine. She asked, "Are there any other questions?" None. Li Yi stood up and turned to walk 2 steps. He then turned back and said, "The night is cold. Don't sit for too long. Rest early." Morning Dew Hall. After His Majesty left the palace, although Her Highness the eldest princess had been acting as the court's administrator, she did not live in the Hall of Diligent Government. Usually, the memorials sent by the Minister of Shangshu would be sent to the palace where she lived. "You have to continue following up on the matter of papermaking, but I think it should be done soon. In 2 days' time." Li Yi spread out a piece of paper and wrote and drew on it. Lowering the price of paper is a good thing for the scholars of the world. It is also a sharp weapon to rope in the scholars. The Academy has already begun preparations in the various provinces. When the time comes, there will naturally be people who will publicize what you have done in the capital. Once these 2 things are done, it will almost be enough to win the hearts of the scholars of the world. Continue to send people to the Yu family every day. They will definitely continue to raise the price of paper. When the price reaches a certain level, they will definitely be tempted and start to stock up. Because if the Academy uses that price to buy their paper, the entire operation of the Academy will collapse. They will kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, we will definitely not let them kill 2 birds with 1 stone. After the new cheap and good quality paper is released, the Yu family's paper mill will collapse and the paper they have in stock won't be sold. The Yu family. It just so happens that winter is coming. We won't starve to death with the Cui family. We will have company and won't be lonely. After listening to him, Emingzi nodded, but her face showed some confusion. She looked at Li Yi and asked seriously, "Can I really do it?" Li Yi looked around and moved closer to her. He said in a small voice, "Don't think about these things now. What we need to do now is to let His Majesty know, let all the civil and military officials know, that what His Majesty can do, you can also do it, and you can do it better, even better than all the previous emperors of the past dynasties. This is something that happens subtly. We already have a lot now. Even if we encounter some resistance in the future, at that time, that little bit of resistance won't be a big deal." Li Yi had also seriously thought about it. Compared to the legendary figure, the eldest princess, whether it was her identity, position, or the power in her hands, was much greater. It could be said that she was truly a good seedling. The only thing she lacked might be that kind of temperament and means. Of course, he also did not want the eldest princess to have that kind of temperament and means. She only needed to be responsible for completing the task given to her by His Majesty, and being as beautiful as a flower. As for other things, there was him. Chapter 803. Is the Princess Royal in? Li Xian stood at the entrance of the Morning Dew Hall and asked a palace maid. After getting an affirmative answer, he walked in. These days, Emingzi was sometimes in the palace and sometimes at Li Yi's place. If he wanted to see her, he had to rely on luck. This was not the most depressing thing. The most depressing thing was that no matter where they were, she and Li Yi always seemed to deliberately avoid him when they were talking about things. He had accidentally bumped into them a few times. The 2 of them were originally having a serious discussion, but when they saw him, they would immediately change the topic. The last time, they actually said that they were talking about whether the crown princess would give birth to a boy or a girl, and even asked him if he liked a son or a daughter. Needless to say, of course he liked a son. But if it was a daughter, it was fine, because it would be his child. This was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that between the 2 of them, one was his best friend, and the other was his family. This feeling of being ostracized by the people closest to him was very uncomfortable. There must be something hidden in this that he did not know. He opened the door and saw the 2 people in the room. After a moment of shock, he smiled and said, "You're both here. The new paper has been made, it's very good." "Oh yes, what were you talking about just now?" Because the 2 of them were talking about something secretive, Li Yi deliberately stayed very close to the Princess Royal. When Li Xian pushed the door open and entered, he had no time to react at all. He secretly glanced at the Princess Royal. At such a close distance, she should have been able to sense it. Emingzi lowered her head. She had been absent-minded for a moment, and when she realized it, It was already too late. Li looked at Li Xian, then looked at Emingzu and asked, "Yes, what were we talking about just now?" Emingzu looked at him and said, "The soup you brought today was very delicious. Let's continue tomorrow." Li Yi's face was full of regret. "I was going to bring another kind of soup tomorrow. It's even more effective." Li Xian stared blankly at the two of them. When he came in just now, the two of them were so close to each other. When they turned around to talk to him, their faces were almost touching. Now they were actually telling him. What soup were they discussing just now? What kind of soup did they need to stand so close to each other? The two of them had been behaving strangely lately. They had been hiding together all day. A man and a woman alone, cheating on each other. A man and a woman together in a room, acting sneakily, and not letting him know what they were discussing. There was definitely nothing good about it. "Why are you asking so many questions?" Li glanced at him. "Just now, what did you say about the paper creation?" "No, you have to make it clear to me today." Li Xian didn't seem to be so easy to fool this time. He looked at the two of them with a sullen face. Originally, it was a matter of the three of them together. Suddenly one day he was pushed out. The three heroes of the capital had become the two heroes of the capital. This kind of feeling could not be understood unless one experienced it personally. Li looked at him. He didn't know what to say. Of course, it was impossible to tell the truth. This was no small matter. Even Li Xian couldn't know about it. He couldn't even think about it in that direction. This reason was not easy to come up with in Li Xian's mind. He couldn't help but think about the various states between Li Yi and Emingzu over the past few days. Or rather, signs as well as their intimate appearance when he came in just now. At this moment, Li Yi and Emingzu seemed to have thought of something. One of them was stuttering, and the other was lowering her head in silence. A thought flashed through his mind. Could it be? He looked at the two of them suspiciously. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't have guessed this kind of thing. Mingzhu's face also showed a trace of unnaturalness. Li Yi's nervousness and Mingzhu's panic naturally didn't escape Li Xian's eyes. Seeing this scene, his heart was almost certain of his guess. He blurted out, "Could it be there's something going on between the two of you?" "Ah." Li Yi's expression froze. "What?" Mingzhu raised her head to look at Li Xian. Still pretending, still pretending?" Li Xian looked at the two of them with a face full of agitation. He had an expression that said, "Stop pretending. I knew it. There's definitely something going on between the two of you." Li looked at him in a daze. "No, you. When we were in Qing'an Prefecture, I knew that the two of you sooner or later. Don't mess around. Have you settled your wife? Have you settled your sister-in-law?" I've settled those two. And Uncle Huang. Emingzu is the eldest princess. It's difficult to settle the etiquette." Li Yi had never seen Li Xian so agitated. He couldn't even get a word in. Then he thought of something. He didn't have many opportunities to meet with the eldest princess, and he also had to be on guard against Li Xian at all times. What could he do to get past this hurdle and make him pay more attention in the future so that he wouldn't be so reckless? It seemed like there really was. So he held the eldest princess's hand and sighed. His face showed helplessness. "You also know that Emingzu is the eldest princess." He looked at Li Xian. His expression was slightly gloomy. "So if we want to be together, it's as difficult as ascending to heaven." Li Xian hurriedly said, "Don't be discouraged. You don't look like someone who gives up easily. Let's think of a way together. It should be possible." Li Yi's tone was sad. "So, we can only be together for such a short period of time when we are discussing politics." Although it was hard to lie to him like this, he didn't have any conscience. But it was better than letting him know the truth. A white lie was worth forgiving. The eldest princess also understood his intention at this moment. She quietly let him hold her hand. In Li Xian's view, this was a kind of floating and sinking according to the man. Otherwise, with Mingzhu's temper, she would only hold a man's hand. It was impossible for her to hold his hand. "I know. It's not easy for you. I'll leave now." Li Xian nodded fiercely to show that he understood. He turned and walked outside without any hesitation. "Forget it. I still have business today. Li grabbed his arm and pulled him back. He asked, You just said that the paper has been made? Li Xian looked at them again and then said, It has been dried. The quality is really high and the cost is so low. Once it is launched, the Academy's problem can be solved. But he thought of something else and asked doubtfully, Of the two types of paper you made this time, one is of high quality and low price. It will definitely be recognized by the world, but the other, it is very soft. After you use ink, it will immediately permeate. You can't write on it, you can't draw on it, and you can't use it to wrap things. Why did you waste so much effort to make this inferior paper? Li glanced at him and said, Why do you care why I made this paper? Since it has been made, it must be of great use. Otherwise, what is it used for? To wipe my ass? Li Xian looked at him disdainfully. Vulgar. Let's not talk about this. Li looked at him and said, I've taught you the basic method of paper making. Now you have a certain understanding of the principle of paper making. You can use this knowledge to take a small step forward. How? Li Xian asked doubtfully. The paper for writing has been made. It shouldn't be difficult to make waterproof paper and fireproof paper. I'll give you 3 days. Is that enough? Li Xian's eyes widened. Waterproof paper and fireproof paper? Why? Is 3 days too short? Li thought for a moment and said, Then 5 days. 5 days is enough. If it's longer, I may not want to eat paper-wrapped fish so much. Li Xian shook his head vigorously. As the saying goes, paper can't contain fire. This paper will also become useless in contact with water. How can you make the 2 kinds of paper you mentioned? Haven't I already taught you the basic method of paper making? Besides, you are in the field of science. Don't say the word impossible so easily. Li walked to the door of the hall and seemed to think of something. He turned around and said, By the way, about me and Emingzu. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Li Xian said in a daze. Then he counted with his fingers and said loudly, Also impossible is 3 words. Chapter 804. In the small courtyard of Willow Lane, Xiao Chui held her chin with one hand and stared straight at the door. She murmured, Miss Lily hasn't been here for a long time. Zheng Zimo was spreading the osmanthus flowers she had just picked yesterday on the stone table to dry. After the osmanthus flowers were dried and ground into powder, they could be stored until this time next year. The fragrance filled the courtyard. She didn't answer Xiao Chui's question. Instead, she moved the ones that had just been sun-dried to a place where the sun could shine. Miss. Xiao Chui stood up and trotted over. She asked, Miss, why aren't you in a hurry? What's the hurry? Zheng Zimo glanced at her and sat back down at the stone table. Why isn't Li Li here yet? The servant girl only felt that her young miss was really silly. She anxiously said, Did you two quarrel? Otherwise, why hasn't young Master Li come here for so long? Young miss, at this time you can't throw a tantrum. Young Master Li is such a good person. Okay. Zheng Zimo waved her hand and said, His wife is about to have a baby. He is taking care of it at home. Of course, he doesn't have time to come over. Don't think too much all day. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiao Chui nodded. Her heart finally relaxed. Zheng Zimo looked up at her and asked, What did you say about me just now? Petulant? I'm not. Xiao Chui ran over and shook her arm. Miss is the best. Wan Ruoqing, wearing an apron, came out of the kitchen and asked with a smile, Zimo, didn't you say you wanted to learn how to make osmanthus cakes from me? Come in. You. Zheng Zimo stood up and pointed her finger at Xiao Chui's forehead. Then, she turned around and walked quickly to the kitchen. Is it difficult to make osmanthus cakes? She was full of confidence before, but after walking into the kitchen, she was a little worried. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, It's not difficult to make, but it's not easy to make it delicious either. Osmanthus powder, noodles, water temperature, kneading time, steaming time, and the size of the fire will more or less affect the taste. Ah! Zheng Zimo's eyes widened, and her face revealed a dispirited expression. It's over. I can't do so many things. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, As long as it's you who did it, It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. What are you talking about? Zhang Zimo blushed and said, I just want to learn and cook for myself in the future. All right. If you say it's for yourself, I'll make it for myself. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, although the process is a bit complicated, fortunately there is still a lot of time. After trying a few times, I will naturally be familiar with it. What do you mean I'm making it for myself? That's what I meant. Okay. I'll make it for you. But before that, I have a question to ask you. Why are you acting so mysterious? What's the problem? Say it. Does drunken Emo like boys or girls? Zhang Zimo was startled and immediately blushed. Seeing the teasing look on Wan Ruoqing's face, how could she not know that what they said that day had been heard by her? She said angrily, good, you dare to laugh at me. She reached out to tickle the other, and Wan Ruoqing dodged and fought back. After a while, the two women were flushed. Zhang Zimo panted slightly and said, no more. Let's get started. Wan Ruoqing nodded, and a smile appeared on her slightly haggard face. However, in this smile, there was a hidden trace of loneliness, desolation, and sourness. Zhang Zimo, who was full of joy and sweetness, did not notice it. The maids of the Li family had been very frightened in recent days. They were specially assigned by the old lady to take care of the young madam, but it had been half a month, and they could only do things like wiping the table and sweeping the floor. The Marquis's care for young madam could be said to be meticulous. He was so meticulous that they could not interfere at all. He was so meticulous that other than cooking personally, he even chased them away from things like combing hair and washing feet. What made them sad and even a little frustrated was that the hair that Master Ho combed for the young madam was much more beautiful than theirs. Even the maids who were the best at this could not compare. For a woman, wasn't the happiest thing in life to marry a husband who was willing to spoil her, love her, and take care of her in every possible way? Even if this husband did not have any great ability, it was enough to help each other for a lifetime. And Master Ho could no longer be described as great ability. He had great ability, the youngest Duke of the Jing Kingdom, the youngest Minister of Golden Ziguanglu, and the most favored official of His Majesty. The more capable Master Ho was, the more precious the things he did for the young madam were. Their Marquis was far from being comparable to the group of coquettish, cheap and powerful nobles outside. All right, husband, there's nothing else for me to do here. Husband, please go back to your work. Inside the room, Rui looked at Li Yi and said helplessly, it's nothing. Li Yi shook his head and asked, are you hungry? Do you want me to peel an apple for you? The Wang family of Luochuan just sent it over this morning. It's better than the offerings sent to the palace. Oh, you're not hungry? Then are you thirsty? The soup is almost ready. I'll go get you a bowl. I'm not thirsty. All right, then you rest first. I'll be in the courtyard. Call me if you need anything. Li Yi closed the door, walked into the courtyard, and sat opposite Mississippi Lu. Mississippi Lu was reading a newly published wuxia picture book. Li Yi asked casually, do you have enough money? Mississippi Lu turned a page, and her eyes didn't move away from the picture book. She said, 100,000 taels is enough for a long time. My previous investment can be gradually recovered now, and I won't need so much in the future. After all, he was concerned about her. Her casual attitude was a bit too much. Li Yi frowned slightly, looked at her, and said, hey Rui, when you speak, can you look at others? This is the most basic respect, right? Mississippi Lu was stunned when she heard this, and then nodded. She closed the picture book, raised her head, and sat up straight. She looked into his eyes and said apologetically, okay. After receiving Mississippi Lu's apology, Li nodded in satisfaction and asked, where were we just now? Oh, Lu Meng's investment has paid off. Mississippi Lu showed an expression of interest. She looked into his eyes to show respect and asked, speaking of your friend with the surname Li, has his matter been resolved? What are you talking about? Don't always talk about others behind their backs. Li Yi stood up and said, there's something going on at the school. I'll go take a look. You stay at home and take good care of your sister. There was nothing going on at the school. As the vice dean and dean, Li Han would take care of all the matters at the school. However, he was still young, just over 11 years old. If the position of dean was really given to him, the old emperor and the court officials wouldn't feel at ease. Therefore, although he was now exercising the authority of the dean, he still had to wait for a few years to take over the position. There was a small grassy slope at the back of the school. In order to protect the lawn, neither students nor teachers were allowed to go up there. Of course, the dean was not included. At the back of the grassy slope, where they couldn't see, Li Yi and the eldest princess sat side by side. It was not an easy task to be in charge of the affairs of a country. Even a martial arts master had limited energy. She looked a little tired and didn't speak. She just crossed her knees and lowered her head, listening to Li Yi. The Yu family should also know that the paper price they offered can't be higher. If it's higher, your people don't have to agree, or it will be too fake. There's also news from the paper mill. They really have started to stock up. Let's wait a little longer. The word live that I told you last time. Li Yi only said a few words before he felt a slight weight on his shoulder. He turned his head and saw the eldest princess leaning on his shoulder. She had actually fallen asleep. Li Yi stared blankly for a moment, then sighed softly. It seemed that she was really tired. Whether this kind of life was good or bad for her, he didn't know. He didn't move again and let her lean on him. He looked at the sparkling lake in the distance and thought about something else. At the bottom of the grassy slope, a figure walked up quietly without making a sound. Li Xian crawled up the grassy slope and looked down. When he saw the figures snuggling up to each other, he nodded slightly and slowly climbed back down. Chapter 805. The Academy of Sciences really can't make waterproof and fireproof paper. Li Xian looked a little haggard. It was obvious that he had been thinking about this matter for the past few days. It seemed that he really had no clue. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up so quickly. If you can't make it, then forget it. At most, I won't eat paper-wrap fish anymore. Li Yi shook his head and said, Emingzu is very busy these days. Keep a close eye on the paper mill, especially the method of making paper. Don't leak it. Also help to take care of the people from the princess's residence. Li Xian nodded and said, Don't worry, I'm watching. Speaking of Emingzu, Li Xian turned to look at him and hesitated for a moment before saying, I know it's not easy for you, but Emingzu is tired enough dealing with political affairs. You should control yourself and take care of your health. Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked, What should we control? Anyway, just control yourself. Look at how tired she is. Watching Li Xian turn to leave, Li Yi shook his head and murmured, Strange. Fearing that he would forget, he reminded him again. Insist on visiting the Yu family. Got it. Li Xian waved to the back and walked out of the gate. The Yu mansion. A steward of the Yu mansion said to the middle-aged official sitting on the chair with a bitter smile, Sir, it's really not that we don't want to help. It's just that the paper mill of the Yu family just received a few big orders before the new year. We really can't spare any extra people. The middle-aged official thought for a moment and said again, If the Yu family is willing to provide this batch of paper to the academy first, the price can be increased by 1 liter. The steward looked embarrassed. He thought for a moment and said, Sir, please wait for a moment. I'll go and inform the master first. Not long after, Ning Yuan Ho Dingfeng personally saw the official of the princess's residence out and said, Sir, rest assured that what the princess is doing is good for the country and the people. The Yu family is also doing our part for the country. Thank you very much, Marquis. I will take my leave first. Farewell. Seeing the official leave, a strange smile appeared on Yu Dingfeng's face, and he walked back into the mansion. Father, are we going to agree to the princess just like that? A young man came from afar and followed him. He asked anxiously, How are we going to explain this to the Cui family and the king of Shu? What do you know? Yu Dingfeng glanced at him and said, The demand for paper in the academy is so large that no one but the Yu family can afford it. Since they are offering such a high price, why don't we do it? If this large sum of money is used on this, I want to see how their academy will operate in the future. If their academy can't continue and we get the money for nothing, not only will noble consort Chui not blame us, but this matter will also be a great merit. The young man was startled for a moment before a look of reverence appeared on his face. Father is wise. Yu Dingfeng waved his hand and said, All right, stop flattering me. Tell me what's the matter. Nothing can be hidden from father. The young man smiled embarrassedly and said, Third brother has been reflecting on himself in his room for half a month. Mother sent me to ask when. Don't mention that bastard to me. Hearing him mention this matter, Yu Dingfeng's face was filled with rage. If it weren't for that blind bastard provoking that person from the Chen family, that madman Chen Chong wouldn't have come knocking on their residence to denounce them. The Yu family had paid a heavy price to settle this matter, and even now, he still felt his heart ache when he thought about it. I said 1 month, so it's 1 month. Not a day less, not even an hour less. Yu Dingfeng said with a sullen face. He then asked, Have you found the prostitute from that day? The young man lowered his head and said, Not yet. When I found the brothel, I heard that she redeemed herself on the same day and left. As for where she went, I don't know. Yu Dingfeng's face became even more sullen. Even now, if he still did not know that the Yu family had been schemed against, he would not be fit to be the head of the Yu family. Half a month ago, after listening to the bodyguard's detailed account of what had happened that day, he realized that the appearance of that woman and the words she had said were all meant to lead that unfilial son into a conflict with that person from the Chen family. That was why Chen Chong had come knocking on their door. It was clear that someone had schemed against the Yu family from behind. Although he did not know who the mastermind was, he had to settle this score with the Chen family sooner or later. Originally, after knowing the identity of the other woman in the cloth shop that day, he still had many misgivings. After all, the youngest golden Ziguanglu of all the dynasties was not a person who was easy to get along with. Fortunately, after so much time had passed, that person had not made any moves. Perhaps, he had already forgotten about this matter? Yes, he must have forgotten about it. When Li Yi walked out of the School of Mathematics, Li Xian chased after him, and asked after listening to him, Has the Yu family agreed? Li Xian nodded and said, They just agreed. Should we release that paper now? No hurry. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Let them stock up more goods first. Originally, there was only a small grudge with the Yu family, but it had been half a month, and with the interest, the small grudge had long become a big one. Bullying Emingzhu and Zue Emo only made them lose money, which was not a big deal. After all, although the money was gone, at least the people were still there. When passing by a brothel, he asked Su to stop the carriage. This brothel was the core of all the brothels in the capital. Usually, all the matters of the brothel would be gathered here. If Ruoqing was not in Willow Lane, she would be here most of the time. County Marquis Li? When walking into the brothel, a voice came from behind. Li Yi turned his head and looked at the middle-aged man who came in from outside. The middle-aged man in luxurious clothes took 2 steps forward, smiled and said, It's really County Marquis Li. Li Yi's eyes swept over the man behind the middle-aged man. Then he looked at him in confusion and asked, You are? I'm Qin He. The middle-aged man smiled and said, Prime Minister Qin is my father. Li Yi made an obeisance with one hand in the other before his chest. So it's Lord Qin. You flatter me. The middle-aged man said with a smile, I'm the 5th child in the family, and I have no official position. I'm just an ordinary man. County Marquis Li, you also come to the brothel to watch the show? I'm just watching. Li Yi smiled and asked casually, I wonder what show Lord Qin is watching this time. The Orphan of Zhao. Lord Qin smiled and said, This show is really good. I don't know who wrote it. It's the 3rd time I've watched it. Li Yi said in surprise. It turns out that Lord Qin likes to watch this kind of show of enduring revenge. Lord Qin shook his head with a smile and said, I'm just watching, just watching. Li Yi chatted with this 5th master of the Qin clan for a while before the latter entered a railing. Li Yi stood outside for a moment before withdrawing his gaze, and walking towards the small building inside with familiarity. Li. Inside the small building, there were several women busy. Seeing Li Yi come in, they hurriedly got up and saluted. Young master, are you looking for Miss Ruoqing? She's upstairs. Li nodded to them with a smile, walked up the stairs, and gently knocked on the door of a room. Come in. When Li pushed the door open and entered, Wan Ruoqing was writing something at the desk. Without raising her head, she said softly, recently there have been 2 new shows, and the repertoire needs to be rearranged. The costumes should be ready soon, and I'll go and urge them tomorrow. The 2 brothels in the east of the city are a little understaffed, and need to be transferred. Ah, you're here. There was no sound coming from the door. She raised her head and glanced at it. After a moment of surprise, she immediately stood up. Li walked over slowly and said, You don't have to personally arrange these trivial matters. The people below can also do it. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, I have nothing to do, so I'll just do what I can. How many times have you said it, but you've never listened? Li looked at her, shook his head, and said helplessly. When talking to her, she had always been so gentle and soft. She was truly a woman as gentle as water. No matter how impetuous he was, he could quickly calm down after spending a short time with her. When he passed by here, he came to see her and talked about some things about the brothels. He didn't know how many times he had told her to rest more and not to be too tired. Then he refused her offer to send him downstairs and left. Above the small building, a gentle gaze, through the window, watched him walk out of the brothel, and stopped at the place where his figure disappeared. The figure leaned against the window and stared blankly, until the sky darkened. Chapter 806. In the hibiscus garden. The warm sunlight shone on the square in front of a palace. Jing Emperor was basking in the sun while rocking his chair comfortably. He smiled as he looked at the children who were playing and running in front of him. It was not until he was tired that he yawned and asked, How's the matter at the academy? Standing in the sun like a pole, motionless for half an hour, the figure finally moved and said, Although His Highness is busy with government affairs every day, he has never neglected the matter of the academy. Now the academy in the capital has already started construction. The 5 states near the capital have also begun the construction of their respective academies. However, His Highness seems to have encountered trouble in another matter. Changde said a few words, and Jing Emperor frowned slightly. The Yu family? Changde nodded and said, I am afraid that the Cui family is behind the Yu family. After all, if the academy is really implemented, in the long run, it will shake the foundation of the aristocratic families. The imperial court's paper shops are distributed to various yamens. They can't take out too much to give to the academy. The Yu family is indeed a problem. Jing Emperor thought for a moment and asked, How did Emingzi deal with it? His Highness sends people to discuss with the Yu family every day. It seems that they have just reached an agreement, but the price is a bit too high. Jing Emperor looked puzzled and murmured, This is not like Mingzhu's style of doing things, and it is not like that boy. What is Li Yi doing recently? His wife is about to give birth. These days he has been attending to her. What a good-for-nothing guy. Jing Emperor waved his hand and said, The scenery in the hibiscus garden is pleasant, and the weather is good today. Go and call the 3 of them over. I haven't seen them for a long time. The arrogant Lolita, who was approaching from behind, immediately gave up the idea of scaring her father. She hurriedly ran over and asked, Father, is teacher coming over? Jing Emperor nodded and said, Father is busy today. Shanning just said that she wants to go out to play. Just bring more guards. Remember not to make trouble. When did she say that she wanted to go out? After getting a positive answer, the arrogant Lolita said in a sweet voice and immediately ran back. Emperor Jing asked in confusion, Where are you going? I didn't even wash up this morning, so of course I have to dress up and change my clothes. By the time her voice could be heard, she had already disappeared into the back of the hall. When did this child become so vain? Emperor Jing said doubtfully. He waved his hand and said, Ask the catering company to prepare today's banquet. Just as Li Yi was about to leave, a eunuch came to his door and said that His Majesty had summoned him to Furong Garden. After finding out the cause of the matter, he learned that the eldest princess and Li Xian had also been summoned, so he didn't think too much about it. In any case, he also planned to enter the palace to discuss matters with the eldest princess, so going to Farong Garden was a bit closer. The net had already been cast. After all these days, the fish had already entered the net. It was time to reel in the net. You of all the surnames, it had to be this one. The family was unfortunate. The family was unfortunate. When he went out, Fong ran over from a distance and said, "Son-in-law, where are you going? I've finished the things you gave me a few days ago." Li Yi was surprised and said, "So fast?" Fong nodded and said, "Next time you can leave these small things to others. These days I didn't even have time to take care of the shops in the city." "All right, get in the car." Li Yi waved his hand. These days, without Fong, it was much quieter. However, he couldn't let him keep doing those unimportant chores. He only hoped that he could sum up the experience and learn from it. When he arrived at Farong Garden, Li Xian and the eldest princess had not arrived yet. Seeing that rocking chair, Li felt a little distressed. The ruler of a country came to snatch a rocking chair in broad daylight, and didn't even get a tael of silver as compensation. Was there still law in this world? The old emperor lay on the rocking chair and asked directly, "What are you going to do about the academy?" "What about the academy?" Li Yi was surprised and said, "Isn't it always the eldest princess who deals with the academy?" "I don't know." Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, "All right, Mingzu is a straightforward person. How could she think of such a sinister idea? Don't think that I don't know that it's all your ideas. Last time in the Imperial Garden, I heard everything." "I'm sorry, I forgot." Li Yi smiled awkwardly and then said doubtfully, "Your Majesty, you were just talking about the academy. The academy has been doing well recently. Nothing has happened." Emperor Jing frowned and said, "Then the Yu family." Li Yi looked puzzled and asked, "Which Yu family?" "Ning Yuan Ho." Emperor Jing had just opened his mouth when he saw Li Yi's expression. He was startled and seemed to understand something. He nodded and said, "The Yu family has made contributions to the country in the past. Don't kill them." Li Yi shook his head and explained, "Your Majesty, you misunderstood me. I didn't intend to kill them, Father." The eldest princess came from behind and bowed to Emperor Jing. "I'll take my leave first." It was better for an outsider like him not to know about the discussion between Her Majesty and the retired emperor. Li Yi sensibly retreated. He still had to eat here later, so he couldn't leave for the time being. Fortunately, the scenery in Hibiscus Garden was good. He planned to go to the lake to enjoy the scenery. After a few steps, he stopped and stared blankly in front of him. Not far away from the intersection, a proud Lolita wearing a white palace dress stood there charmingly. Li Yi was slightly surprised. The proud Lolita usually liked to wear brightly colored clothes and wore her hair in a double spiral bun. The flying fairy bun was the favorite hairstyle of young girls. Today, she wore a white palace dress and her hair was combed back into a heart bun. At first glance, she didn't look like a crazy girl at all. At this moment, Li Yi truly felt that the 14-year-old Princess Shining was no longer the proud Lolita from before. "Sir." She stood there with her hands clasped together and said something in a low voice. Li Yi came back to his senses and walked over. He asked, "Where's Yongning? Why isn't she with you?" She lowered her head and said with a red face, "Yongning has to go to class today. I'm not feeling well, so I asked for leave." "You're not feeling well?" Li looked down at her and asked with concern, "What's wrong? Have you seen the imperial physician?" The proud Lolita lowered her head and looked at her toes. She whispered, "I feel uncomfortable for a few days every month. There's no need to see the imperial physician." Li didn't know how to respond to this question. The little Lolita had really grown up. In the past, she liked to hold his hand when she walked and would often cling to him like an octopus. Now that they were walking side by the lake, she wasn't as noisy as she used to be. She became exceptionally quiet, which made Li Yi feel a little uncomfortable. Sitting on the lawn by the lake, the proud Lolita softly talked about some interesting things that happened to her in the academy. For example, no matter what kind of chess they played, she had no match in the academy. Another time, when the mathematics teacher punished her friend, She asked Li Han to come up with a few questions to ask the mathematics teacher. In the end, the female teacher didn't come to class for 3 days. Li Xian and the eldest princess walked over from afar. Li Xian looked at the two of them and squatted down. He said, "Bing Ning, come with Brother Xian. Brother Xian will give you something fun to play with." Brother Xian, I've grown up. I don't play with those things anymore." Although the proud Lolita was unwilling, she was still dragged away by Li Xian. Li lay comfortably on the grassy slope. Below him was a small lake. The lake water was dark green. The wind blew from the surface of the lake, bringing a refreshing coolness. This kind of weather was actually very suitable for barbecues or picnics. It was a pity that the old emperor had already arranged a banquet. Mingzi sat beside him. She bent her legs and looked at the lake. She seemed to be thinking about something, and her gaze was slightly absent-minded. Li Xian walked over from afar and said, "I'm afraid that the two of you will attract suspicion if you're alone. It'll be better if I'm here." He took out 2 pieces of dough from his sleeves and stuffed them into his ears. He looked at Li Yi and said, "Don't worry, I can't see or hear anything. You guys can continue chatting." After he finished speaking, he walked to a place 10 feet away from the two of them and lay down on the ground. At the same time, in a palace somewhere in the courtyard, a girl in a white dress lay on the bed. She crossed her legs and swayed unconsciously. She flipped through the pages of a book and muttered, "The book says that girls should be reserved, but teacher doesn't seem to like it." That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.